Hey there, Night Wanderer. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe you're in bed or curled up on the couch with a warm blanket. Wherever you are, let the rain outside soothe your thoughts and slow your breath. If you enjoy this quiet corner of the internet, feel free to like the video, and I'd love to know. What time are you listening to this? Drop it in the comments. Are you an early dreamer or a true midnight soul? All right, close your eyes, settle in, and let the story begin. I used to think cities made me tired. The constant pulse of traffic, the hum of fluorescents, the crowded sidewalks where no one makes eye contact, it all wore me down over the years. But after what happened, I've come to realize it wasn't the cities. It was me. I had been slowly running out of something, and I didn't know what until it was almost gone. 3 months ago, I accepted a job as a night shift maintenance technician for the Heron Hill Transit Line. That's what they called it officially. In practice, it was a half-defunct underground tram system carved beneath a town most maps no longer marked. A relic of an urban expansion plan that fizzled in the late 80s, leaving behind a handful of tunnels, 2 unused platforms, and a local bus service that barely ran. I took the job because it paid well and promised solitude, 2 things I thought would help me after the burnout. After everything fell apart in the city, there was no application process, just a voicemail on my phone from a number I didn't recognize, instructing me to report to Heron Hill's transit office at 6 p.m. the following Monday. It should have been strange, but I was too hollow to question it. Heron Hill itself was small. Faded brick storefronts, old signs sun-bleached into near anonymity. There was a diner with cloudy windows and a boarded-up cinema that still had movie posters from a decade ago curling inside the frames. The main street looped into itself like a snake eating its tail. The kind of town where people look like they've forgotten how to speak above a whisper. I stayed in a 2-room apartment above an empty hair salon. The rent was dirt cheap. The walls were thin, and when it rained, which it did often, I could hear water tapping against the pipes in odd, rhythmic ways, like someone was trying to send Morse code from inside the walls. I didn't meet a single neighbor. The transit office was just a kiosk beside the Heron Hill terminal, a low concrete building half buried in the hill, with moss slicking its roof and vines crawling toward the entrance like they were trying to pull it shut for good. Inside, it smelled of dust and old paper. I met a man named Elias, or maybe that was just what he told me. He looked like someone who had once been tall, but had shrunk from years of ducking under ceilings too low. He didn't say much, just handed me a ring of keys, a flashlight, and a binder labeled Tunnel C Protocol. He pointed at the access door to the left of the terminal and said, "Start at platform B. Walk the line. Check the lights. Don't follow any echoes." I asked what he meant. He only blinked at me, then said, "It's quiet work." Then he left. I never saw him again. I remember the first night I entered the tunnel. It wasn't dramatic, just a push of a metal door and the cool breath of damp air rushing over me. The smell was earthy, like wet stone and copper. The tunnel descended gradually, a long sloping ramp lit by industrial bulbs that buzzed just enough to feel alive. The lights spaced themselves far apart, so the gaps between them felt like moments lost to time. In those spaces, I noticed something odd. My footsteps didn't sound the same. They came back slightly wrong, like someone else was walking a half step behind me. But it was just the acoustics, I told myself. Nothing more. Platform B was just a long slab of concrete, shadowed by rusting pillars. The tracks were covered in grime and fallen leaves, though I never saw how leaves could have gotten that deep underground. My job was simple. Walk from Platform B to the old service terminal at the end of Tunnel C, checking lights, clearing debris, and reporting any signs of water damage. The air grew colder the farther in I went. The walls began to sweat moisture. Somewhere in that stretch of tunnel, the ground sloped in ways I didn't expect, angles that made no sense. I tried not to look too long at the ceiling, because sometimes I saw what looked like cracks, but they moved when I stared. I kept telling myself it was just old infrastructure. Concrete settles, water leaks, sounds bounce. The real reason I was there, the part I didn't admit to Elias or anyone, was because I needed to be forgotten for a while. After the burnout, after the firing, after the silence between me and my sister turned into a full year of absence, I didn't want to be seen anymore. But tunnels don't forget. They just wait. By the end of the first week, I had memorized every crack, every flickering bulb, every piece of graffiti, even the one near the midway pillar that read, "Wherever you stand, you cast two shadows here." That one stayed with me. I kept a logbook, mostly to ground myself. Each night I wrote down anything odd I saw or felt. Some of the entries from those early days read like this. Day 3, lights 13, 15, 16 dim, bulb 21 flickering again. Felt colder than usual near midway point. Heard dripping but found no source. Day 5, saw what looked like a person at the far end of Tunnel C, standing still. Disappeared when I moved closer. Probably my eyes playing tricks. Day 6, Platform B, completely dark when I arrived. Power came back on without intervention. Smelled smoke, but only for a second. No source found. The more I wrote, the more I felt like I was trying to anchor myself to reality. Like if I didn't log it, it would drift away. Or worse, I would. By the end of week 2, I stopped bringing my phone into the tunnel. Not because there was no signal, though there wasn't, but because I kept thinking I heard it vibrate in my pocket when it wasn't there. And sometimes, after I powered it off, it would light up again, briefly, showing a lock screen I didn't recognize. It showed a date in the future. A small thing, easy to explain, but it stayed with me. I started to notice the rain more during this time. It never poured. It just misted constantly, like the whole town was exhaling through wet lungs. It dampened everything. My jacket, my boots, my hair. I could feel the weight of it in my bones, like something pressing down softly but persistently, the way a dream lingers even after you wake. Eventually, I stopped checking the weather. It was always raining. I couldn't remember a clear sky. Near the end of the 3rd week, I found a door in the tunnel that wasn't on the map. It was small, metal, with a slit for a window too clouded to see through. I hadn't noticed it before, but it was carved right into the wall behind an old maintenance cabinet. There was no label, no number. When I put my hand on the knob, it was warm. I didn't open it. Not that night. But I knew then that something was waiting down there. something I had started to feel before I even arrived in Heron Hill. A quiet beckoning, the kind that doesn't shout or claw, just waits. And I kept coming back. The rain didn't stop for the entire 4th week. Not that it was a downpour. It was that constant misting again, fine droplets in the air like suspended breath. Walking to the terminal felt like pushing through someone else's exhale. The streets were still empty. The sidewalks shimmered wet under broken street lamps. I began to feel like the entire town existed under glass. Inside the tunnel, the temperature never changed. Cold, still, but never bitter. Not like weather cold. More like the stillness you feel in a mausoleum, a preserved kind of quiet. I told myself I was acclimating to the routine, memorizing the shadows, the long, sloping hum of the air ducts, the way sound moves when you're the only person around. But things had shifted. They weren't big changes at first, just little things, out of sync like a heartbeat, skipping every few steps. One night, the flashlight beam bent. I was halfway through Tunnel C, approaching the midway support column, when the cone of light from my torch twisted. I don't mean it flickered, I mean the actual beam curved to the left, like it was being pulled by something gravitational. It lasted maybe half a second, then it was back to normal. But in that half second, the light illuminated the side wall, and there was a shape, just an outline. No face, no color, just the silhouette of something crouching low, facing the floor, as if listening. I swung the flashlight back. Nothing, just wet stone. I wrote it down in the logbook, but I didn't reread the entry. The noises started after that. At first it was water dripping, but only when I stood still. The moment I moved, the dripping stopped. When I stopped again, it started but from a different direction, always just outside my periphery. Then came the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed from the ceiling sometimes, or under the tracks, like fingers on glass. One night, I turned off all the tunnel lights, just to see what it would be like. The silence was total, the darkness absolute. I thought maybe I could listen better in the dark. Maybe I could identify the direction of the sounds. But that night, when I shut off the last light near the platform, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. It wasn't loud. No gasping. No wheezing. Just steady, soft breath. Like someone very close was trying not to be noticed. I turned the lights back on immediately. After that, the tunnel began to feel smaller. It was still the same length. The same layout. I hadn't measured, but I walked it enough to know the rhythm of my steps. But something changed in the way it felt. The curve of the walls felt tighter. The ceiling seemed to hover lower, like it was slowly sinking each night. I brushed my head on a pipe I had walked under safely for weeks. At first, I thought it was my posture, maybe I was walking more hunched. But when I held my arms straight out to the side, I could touch both walls at once. That hadn't been possible before. I started to see symbols. They weren't spray painted, not graffiti. They looked burned into the concrete. Thin, black markings like charred ink. They'd appear where I was sure I hadn't seen them the night before, near the fuse box, above the midway pillar, once even on the back of the flashlight itself. One looked like a spiral with a line through it. Another like a pair of open eyes, one above the other. I tried photographing one with an old Polaroid camera I'd brought down, but the photo came out blank. Not black, just blank. White fog. The next day, the symbol was gone. The door, the small one I'd found behind the maintenance cabinet, was still there, still warm. I hadn't told anyone about it. Who would I tell? I never saw Elias again. There was no radio contact, no other maintenance workers, no day shift. It was as if the job had only ever been meant for one person, me. I started to wonder about the protocol binder he gave me. It was light, too light. I went through it again. Most of the pages were blank. Only the first 3 had any writing. Instructions like, walk the full line each night, check bulbs, log disturbances, do not follow any echoes, do not open the small door behind the cabinet in Tunnel C. That last line hadn't been there before. My dreams changed during this period. They used to be colorless flashes of memory, forgotten cities, faces I almost recognized. But now they were fixed, always the same. I stood at the platform. The train tracks glowed red, not like heat, like memory, like old film projected onto black stone. The tunnel walls pulsed slowly, like lungs filling and deflating. And behind me, someone whispered, but I couldn't turn around, not even in sleep. Eventually, I did what I swore I wouldn't. I followed the echo. It was a voice this time, not loud, not panicked, just a calm male voice saying, "Hello? Can someone? Hello? Hello?" It came from the far end of Tunnel C, near where the tracks disappeared into a slope that was supposed to lead nowhere. The official maps called it a collapsed section, but the voice came from beyond it. I walked toward it. Slowly, the echo repeated, "Hello, can someone?" Then, midway through the tunnel, the voice stopped. I stood there, flashlight raised, and I heard my own voice come back. "Can someone? Someone? Someone?" But it didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like mimicry, like someone trying to remember how I said it. That night, the rain was louder than usual, heavy enough to hear it pounding against the tunnel roof, even that deep underground. I heard what I thought was thunder, but it came in patterns, rhythmic, like distant machinery, like wheels. I found a second logbook. It was tucked inside a rusted locker near Platform B. Looked identical to mine. Same binding, same label, Tunnel C observations. But it wasn't my handwriting inside. Whoever wrote it, they had seen the same symbols, the same narrowing tunnel, the same door. But the entries were dated 20 years ago. The last page read, "It knows when you listen. It grows when you remember." I made a map, but I lost it. Don't open the door. Don't walk backwards. If you see yourself, run. The next night, I saw something impossible. I was walking the tunnel as usual. Lights on, flashlight steady. Everything felt normal for once. Then, around the halfway point, I saw a person walking toward me from the far end. They wore the same uniform I did, held the same flashlight. I paused, raised a hand. They didn't wave back. I squinted. The person mirrored my movements, one step forward, one hand lifted, one turn of the head. They were too far to see clearly, but I knew what I was looking at. Me? I didn't sleep after that night. Not really. Even when I closed my eyes, my body stayed alert, listening for footsteps that didn't come, bracing for dreams I couldn't forget. The image of my own shape walking toward me, imitating my movements, had lodged itself somewhere deep, where thoughts become instinct, and I knew it wasn't a reflection. There were no reflective surfaces down there, nothing that smooth, nothing that intentional. That version of me, it was separate, acting, but not understanding, like it had seen me once and was trying to become what it remembered. I kept walking the tunnel anyway, because that's what I was supposed to do. That's what the binder said. That's what Elias told me. But the route changed. It began with simple shifts. Pillars appearing out of place. A signal box that used to be on the left now showing up on the right. I thought maybe I was tired, confused, maybe my memory was playing tricks. Then I reached the service terminal one night and found it completely different. The room was narrower, the walls covered in condensation. The control panel was missing, replaced by an old desk with a cracked rotary phone on top. Dust floated in the air like ash, and sitting in the chair was a person. They didn't turn when I entered, just sat there, facing away, perfectly still. I didn't speak, didn't move closer. I slowly stepped back, 1 foot at a time, and left the room. The next night, the room was empty again, back to normal. But the air smelled like perfume, faint, floral, old, like someone had just left. Around this time, the tunnel stopped making sense. I measured it with my steps. From platform B to the terminal was exactly 212 paces. I'd counted it dozens of times. But now, sometimes it took 400, sometimes 80. Once, I walked for what felt like a full hour without reaching the end. My flashlight battery drained. I turned back. It only took 14 steps to return to the platform. Time too began to slide. My wristwatch would skip hours, or reverse. Sometimes I'd start the shift at 6 p.m. and return to my apartment at 4:00 the same day. Sometimes I'd emerge at sunrise, even though I had only entered the tunnel minutes before. I stopped using clocks. I relied on the rain, and the rain never stopped. The breathing became clearer, not just an impression now, but distinct. Low, steady inhales, always just behind me when I paused. Sometimes a faint exhale would brush the back of my neck. Other times, I'd feel it against the side of my face, like someone leaning close to inspect me. The temptation to spin around grew stronger each time. But I remembered the note from the second logbook, "If you see yourself, run." And I wondered, what happens if you turn around too fast and see something that hasn't finished becoming you? The symbols reappeared, only now they moved. I watched one, a black spiral with branching lines, slowly twist across the concrete, as if drawn by an invisible finger. It left no trail, no mark, just moved, like ink under skin. I started seeing them in my apartment too, on the foggy bathroom mirror, inside the condensation of my window, drawn in the dust on the stairwell rail, each one slightly clearer than the last. The door behind the cabinet was open one night, just slightly, maybe a few inches, enough for the warm air to escape in a single breath, enough to hear something shift beyond it, a drag like cloth on stone, then silence. I closed it. I didn't touch it again for a week. Then came the train. There was never supposed to be a train. The tunnel was decommissioned. That was the entire point. No passengers, no noise, no movement. But on the 39th night, I heard the rails humming beneath my boots. A low, metallic thrum. Then came the lights, distant, flickering beams, cutting through the far end of Tunnel C. At first, I thought it was my eyes, a memory, a hallucination, a dream, but it grew louder, closer. The tunnel began to shake softly, dust falling from the cracks above. A train was coming, but it didn't look right. The headlights were too dim, the shape too narrow. The sound it made was wrong, not like metal wheels, but something slower, groaning, wet. I stepped off the tracks and hid behind the midway pillar. The train, if you could call it that, passed by in silence. No windows, no markings. Just a long, featureless black cylinder gliding far too slowly. And through the small ventilation slit in its side, I saw something watching me. Not a person, not a face, just two dark circles where eyes should be. Too wide, too still. After that, things stopped pretending to make sense. One night, I reached the end of the tunnel and found another platform. Not platform B, not any place I recognized. This one was longer, darker, covered in fog. An old wooden bench sat at the far end, and above it was a sign. Heron Hill Return Service. Return service to what? There were no exits, no staircases, no map, only a mirror, full length, bolted to the wall. I stood in front of it for a long time, and for the first minute, nothing was wrong. My reflection blinked when I blinked, tilted its head when I did, matched me perfectly. But then I moved. I reached up to scratch my shoulder, and my reflection smiled. After that, I stopped writing in the logbook, not because I had nothing left to say, but because it wasn't mine anymore. One morning, I opened it to find new entries I hadn't written. Ones dated weeks into the future. Notes that described events I hadn't experienced yet. Descriptions of things I would later see, exact, detailed, impossible to deny. And then, June 17, you will open the door. June 17, you will see her. June 17, she will not blink. June 17, she is you. I started boarding up the walls in my apartment, taping over the mirrors, putting towels under the doors. But the rain still got in, or what I thought was rain. I began to hear tunnel sounds in my sleep, the hum of the lights, the tap of dripping water, a distant echo repeating my name. Once, I woke up standing in my hallway. My boots were wet. I had to know. So on June 17, I opened the door. It swung wide without resistance, revealing a long, sloping corridor. The walls were smooth, white, wet with condensation. No lights, just a faint glow that came from nowhere and everywhere. I stepped inside. I walked for what felt like hours. No turns, no doors. Just that narrow passage descending deeper and deeper until it curved inside itself, like a spiral. Eventually, I reached a room. Small, round, padded walls, like a soundproof chamber, and in the center, a chair, wooden, simple, facing a mirror. And in the mirror, I saw her. Not me. Not exactly. She looked like me. Wore my clothes. Had my face. But she was smiling. And I wasn't. She lifted her hand and beckoned. I turned and ran. But the tunnel had changed behind me. The straight path was gone. In its place, more doors. Endless doors. Some open, revealing empty rooms. Some closed, with whispers behind them. Some breathing. I chose none of them. I walked until I saw the graffiti again. Wherever you stand, you cast two shadows here. And I realized I hadn't seen my shadow in days. Only hers. And it had started moving on its own. It's strange what the mind accepts when nothing else makes sense. By the time I realized I was no longer walking in a physical place, or at least not a place that followed rules, I understood I wasn't afraid anymore, or not in the way you'd think. It wasn't fear with teeth or adrenaline. It was something colder, quieter, like grief. Grief for a version of myself that had already been left behind. I no longer recognized the tunnel. The concrete was gone. The walls were soft now, padded in some places, slick in others, like they were made of breath or velvet or flesh. I stopped touching them after a while. The light, that faint ambient glow, no longer came from above. It came from inside the walls, and sometimes it pulsed when I walked past, like it recognized me, like it was reacting to me. The sound of dripping water had changed too. It had rhythm, not random, not echoing. It was deliberate, a pattern. And then I realized it was tapping in the same rhythm as my heartbeat. I passed door after door. Some were ajar, revealing glimpses of things that couldn't be my old apartment in the city, my sister's wedding I never attended, the hallway of my childhood home lit by candlelight. I didn't go inside. I don't know if I was supposed to. Some of the doors had numbers. Others had no markings, but were covered in condensation, as if something on the other side was exhaling against them. A few of them knocked back. I reached a chamber eventually. Circular again, like the one with the mirror, but this one was larger cathedral high ceilings that curved in on themselves like a nautilus shell. The floor was smooth, not stone, not metal, something darker, black as wet ink. In the center stood a tall object draped in a heavy sheet. I didn't touch it at first. I circled the room. The walls were marked in spirals and symbols. I now recognized, not with understanding, but with familiarity. They'd been in my dreams, on the back of my eyelids, behind every blink. There were no exits. So eventually, I lifted the sheet. Underneath was a mirror. Not a real one. It had no reflection. Instead, it showed a tunnel. My tunnel, but empty. Then it changed. It showed me walking slowly, flashlight in hand. Then another version of me, standing at the platform, writing in the logbook. Then another curled in a chair, asleep beneath humming lights. And then it showed her, the other me, smiling, standing still while all the versions passed by. One by one, they walked deeper into the tunnel and didn't come back. I screamed at the mirror, hit it with the flashlight. It didn't crack. Instead, the image shifted again and showed something else. Not a person, not a shape, just presence. It hung in the tunnel air like a shadow caught mid-breath, a black fold in space, tall and narrow, always just out of focus, but watching, always watching. And I realized, the tunnel isn't haunted. It is the haunting. I turned from the mirror, and the room was no longer empty. Across from me stood Elias, but younger, no lines on his face, no sunken eyes. He smiled, the same way the woman in the mirror did, calm, understanding, terrifying. He said nothing, just raised a hand and pointed to the wall behind me, and on it was a door, small, steel, marked with the words, "You are ready." Inside was the terminal, but not the one I knew. This one was buried in fog. The walls flickered between materials, sometimes tiled, sometimes wood, sometimes black stone that dripped upward. The bench was missing. The tracks were gone. In their place was water. Still, black, reflective. I stepped forward, and the water didn't ripple. It was solid. And in it, I saw my reflection, not moving, not blinking, just staring back. Then it spoke, with my voice, but not my words. "You remember now." I couldn't respond. "You've always been here." I shook my head. "You wanted to forget, so we let you. You volunteered." My mouth felt dry. I forced a whisper. "Volunteered for what?" The reflection smiled. "To carry it, to keep it asleep, to walk, so it can dream." And suddenly I saw it, the full shape of the tunnel, not as concrete and wire, but as a living thing, a being, vast, dormant, and it required dreamers, walkers, carriers, people who gave themselves to the pattern, people like Elias, people like me. And I remembered the breakdown, the way I begged to disappear, the call that came offering solitude, anonymity, escape, the paperwork I signed without reading, the door I walked through. I hadn't been hired. I had been chosen, or maybe I had chosen it. The final test came quietly. The tunnel returned. Concrete, rust, flickering bulbs. The platform at the end, empty. The air was cold again. And at the far end, I saw her. Me, but still, eyes closed, standing as if asleep. And I knew I had to take her place. To complete the loop, to close the circle, one more version to carry the rhythm, one more dreamer to keep it sleeping. I walked up to her slowly. The air between us thickened like syrup. The hum of the tunnel lights grew louder, not as sound, but as pressure in my ears. When I reached her, she opened her eyes, and for the first time I understood. She wasn't my reflection. She was what was left, a placeholder, and I was the one who had returned. We didn't speak. She simply stepped aside and disappeared into the wall, into the tunnel, into me. I took my place on the platform, closed my eyes, and the tunnel exhaled. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe hours, maybe weeks. The tunnel doesn't count time the way we do. The lights hum in intervals that have nothing to do with minutes. The air moves like tides on a schedule older than clocks. But eventually, I opened my eyes, and the tunnel was still. No sound, no footsteps, no whispers. Only the soft hiss of distant rain somewhere far above, muffled, like it was raining on another world. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. It worked. I could move my fingers, flex my legs, breathe, but something had changed. The way you feel when you wake up from a dream and don't remember who you are yet. Like I had been emptied and slowly poured back into myself, but not all the way. Something was missing, or maybe something extra had come with me. I walked the tunnel again, from platform B to the end. The measurements no longer shifted. The path was straight, predictable. The walls held still. The shadows obeyed light again. But I didn't write anything down. I didn't need to. The logbook was gone anyway. So was the door behind the cabinet. And the other versions of me, the echo, the sleeper, the mimic, had all faded. Only I remained. Or maybe that's not quite true. On the 50th night, I saw someone new. A figure standing at the far end of Tunnel C. They looked unsure, flashlight trembling, steps uncertain, pausing at every flickering light. I recognized the fear. They were new, like I once was. And I understood. The tunnel wasn't done. Not with me. Not with any of us. It chooses, and it waits. We carry it. We walk. So it dreams. And when it stirs, we take our places again. To keep it calm. To keep it asleep. I never tried to leave after that. Not really. I walked the tunnel each night. I watched the lights, listened to the patterns. Sometimes, I passed mirrors just for a second and saw her again. That other me, watching from the edge of glass, never moving, never blinking. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm the one who's frozen and she's the one walking. Sometimes, I wonder if this is the dream and the real world is what sleeps beneath. You might be wondering why I'm telling you all this. Maybe you found this recording. Maybe you're in Heron Hill now working some quiet job, drawn by the promise of isolation, of forgetting. Maybe the rain led you here. Maybe you heard something call your name, soft and slow, from the dark. Maybe the tunnel is already watching you. If that's true, I'm sorry. Truly. But maybe, just maybe, this is what you wanted. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't asked for silence. You wouldn't have stayed this long unless something inside you needed the quiet. And if you're lucky, you'll forget the sound of your own voice too. Because wherever you stand in Heron Hill, you cast two shadows. I came to Station Weatherdy 4 because I thought I needed silence. Not peace, not clarity, just the kind of silence that made everything else fade to gray. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, that lets you forget the sound of your own name. 3 months earlier, my sister had died. A car accident. The kind you see on late-night news recaps, sandwiched between weather updates and stock numbers. Nothing dramatic. Just a miscalculated turn in the rain. No one to blame. No one left to be angry at. Not even herself. And yet I couldn't let it go. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not since the last fight stupid, sharp-edged things said over the phone in exhausted tones. I don't even remember what started it. Only how it ended. Me hanging up. Her never calling back. A gap that stretched and stretched until it became permanent. So when the opportunity came, a job posting buried in a federal contractor site, looking for someone to man an old coastal transmission tower for 6 months. I took it, without asking questions, without telling anyone. I signed the NDA, passed the background check, boarded a small boat, let the fog swallow me whole. Station Wotherdy 4 is built into the cliffs of a forgotten stretch of northeastern coastline, 3 hours by boat from the nearest town, and another hour's walk along a narrow, crumbling trail. The tower rises from the edge of a cliff like a rusted finger, flanked by thick pines that lean too far inward, as if trying to shield it from the sky. There's no cell service, no satellite, just the tower, a concrete block of a living quarter, and the ever-present sound of wind and distant water. The nearest person is likely 50 miles away, maybe more. The job was simple: monitor transmissions. The station is semi-automated now, they told me. All I had to do was check the signal logs daily, ensure the relay equipment didn't go offline, and report anomalies through a secured internal console. They never explained what kind of anomalies they expected. They just told me not to respond to anything I might hear. The implication lingered. The pay was decent, enough to buy time, which was all I really wanted. The station itself was utilitarian: 2 small rooms, one for sleeping, one for working, metal cot, fold-out desk, tiny galley kitchen. Rust stains crept along the floor tiles like veins. The signal room smelled of ozone and dust. Outside, the tower loomed, always humming. On my first night, I stood on the narrow balcony and watched the sea vanish into gray. The fog never lifted, not completely. Even when the rain stopped, the air held a strange thickness, like something unseen was still moving just beyond reach. The wind carried faint sounds, not voices, not exactly, but patterns, like something brushing the edges of speech, turning back before it fully formed. I told myself it was the wind in the pines, or the sea echoing off the cliffs. I started sleeping with the window cracked, just to hear it. Some nights, it almost felt like company. The first week passed without incident. I settled into routine. Wake up, brew strong, bitter coffee, run diagnostics on the signal feed, file reports, sweep the stairwell, read in silence, eat canned soup, sleep. The quiet was thick, but not oppressive. It felt earned. But then, on the 8th day, something changed. I woke to the console beeping. A single red light blinking steadily on the panel marked Receiver Channel B. That channel had been offline since I arrived, deprecated, according to the manual. Nothing was supposed to come through it. I tapped the keyboard. Static poured through the speakers, dry and uneven, like wind across gravel. Then, something else. a faint rhythm buried in the hiss, like Morse code, except slower, less structured. I turned the volume down, saved the log, reported it with a shrug. The response came hours later, through the internal system. Do not interpret. Log only. Channel B is not interactive. Do not attempt to replicate or triangulate source. It struck me as odd the way they emphasized not interactive, like they were afraid I might talk back. I didn't. Not then. Instead, I printed the waveform, pinned it to the wall, watched it for patterns in the silence between tasks. 2 nights later, it happened again. The signal came at 3:14 a.m. clearer this time. No words. Just something beneath the static. A low hum that shifted in tone like breath through a throat that wasn't quite human. I didn't report that part. Instead, I lay in my bunk, eyes open, listening as the wind outside grew still and something else began to move in its place. The fog pressed against the window like a weight, and from the tower, I heard a metal groan, slow and heavy, as if the structure itself were turning towards something I couldn't see. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't, because in that moment, for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone, and that scared me more than anything. The next time the signal came through Channel B, I didn't log it. Not officially. I sat in the dark signal room, rain tapping lightly on the roof, and let it play. It wasn't just static anymore. Beneath the hiss, I could hear rhythm, not Morse, but something older. Slow pulses, rising and falling in uneven intervals, like a language spoken through breath. And layered just beneath that, something strange. A low, wet clicking, not mechanical, organic, like the sound a throat might make, trying to mimic the idea of a voice. I muted the console, sat back. The room felt too warm, the walls too close. When I opened the logbook, my hands shook not out of fear. Exactly. It was something closer to recognition, like I was remembering a sound I hadn't yet heard. I didn't mention any of this in the report. I just wrote, Channel B activated again. No anomalies detected. That was a lie. Because the anomalies weren't just in the signal anymore. They were in the tower. The stairs to the transmission array had always been a spiral rusted metal, groaning underfoot. But on the 11th day, I noticed something strange. The climb took longer. It wasn't obvious at first. Only when I reached the top did I check my watch. 14 minutes. It had never taken more than 6. I'd climbed it every morning since arriving. Same pace. Same boots. But something had shifted. The space inside the tower had stretched. I went back down, counted the steps. 103. The next day, 117. By the end of the week, 140. 2. Still the same height from outside. I stopped climbing after that. The fog got thicker around that time, no longer drifting in waves from the sea, but pressing inward, curling around the base of the station like it was trying to find a way inside. The pines near the cliff edge became harder to see, then they vanished altogether. I looked out the window one morning, and the trees were gone. Not cut, not burned, just absent, like the fog had erased them. There were other things, too. Little things. The canned food in the galley began to rearrange itself. Labels facing forward one day, backward the next. The tea kettle began to whistle even when I hadn't turned the burner on. And once, just once, I walked past the hallway mirror and didn't see my own reflection. The mirror showed the signal room, but I wasn't in it. Just the chair, spinning, slowly. I started keeping a second journal. One I didn't report. I hid it behind the vent grate in the sleeping quarters, just in case. The pages filled quickly, not with analysis, not thoughts. Mostly shapes, repeating curves, tight spirals, long vertical lines, like towers viewed from above. Some nights, I'd wake with the pen still in my hand, ink staining the sheets, symbols scribbled across my palms. I stopped opening the window after the 20th day, because one night I woke to breathing. Not mine, not human, just outside the glass. A slow, drawn inhale, then a pause, then something tapping, not on the window, on the inside wall, as if something had gotten in, but nothing ever was, not visibly. On day 22, the internal console displayed a message I hadn't typed. I had just finished checking the log entries, and the screen flickered for less than a second, and then a line of plain text appeared in the center. Keep listening. No source. No user ID. It wasn't a command. There was no threat. Just a suggestion. The words blinked twice, then vanished. I didn't report that either. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself. The house I lived in as a child had creaked at night. Pipes rattled. Old radiators hissed. But this was different. The station wasn't reacting. It was learning, watching, and worse. I felt like I was beginning to understand it. That's what scared me most. Not the fog, not the sounds, but the slow shift in myself, the part of me that no longer found it strange, the part that started waiting for it to speak again. It did. On day 27, just after 3:00 a.m., Channel B came alive without warning. No beep. Just sudden sound louder, clearer, closer. No rhythm this time. Only words. 3 of them, spoken in my voice. Come upstairs now. Then silence. No static. No breath. Just quiet. I didn't move. I sat in the signal room for hours, not blinking, the screen still humming, the words burned into the back of my eyes. I told myself it was a hallucination, that I hadn't slept, that isolation does strange things. But the next morning, I found the stairwell door open. I hadn't opened it in over a week, and this time, the staircase only had 12 steps. I climbed the stairs. 12 steps. That was all. The metal felt too warm under my hands. Too smooth. Like it had been touched recently by something that didn't leave fingerprints. I expected to reach the tower's broadcast floor, but it wasn't there. Instead, I entered a room I had never seen before. And I should emphasize this. I had seen the tower's interior, every inch, blueprints, maintenance manuals, even crawl space maps. This room wasn't listed anywhere. It had no windows, no lights, but it glowed faintly from walls that pulsed like the inside of a shell held up to your ear. Soft, pinkish, breathing. There was a single chair in the middle. It faced a console, not the kind I use downstairs. Older, analog, rows of dials and switches, and a cracked screen built into the surface. There were no labels, no brand marks, just a strip of yellowed tape with a handwritten word in faded ink. Receive. I didn't sit, not right away. I stood there for a long time, listening. No sound, but I could feel something like heat from a flame just out of view, a presence, a direction. I stepped forward and placed one hand on the console. It responded instantly. The screen lit up not with interface or data, but with a face. Mine, but not live. Not a camera feed, just a still image. Gray, blurred, mouth open like I'd been caught mid-sentence. It flickered every few seconds, switching to other versions of me. One where I was asleep, one where I was smiling, one where I was looking directly at the screen. I turned away. The screen went black, and the moment I looked back, the image was gone. Just a prompt remained. Begin transmission. I left. I ran down the stairs 12 again, heart hammering, skin slick with cold sweat. But when I reached the bottom, I didn't find the signal room. I found the bunk room, as if the tower had folded in on itself. That night, I dreamed of wires beneath skin, thick cords running along the underside of my arms, coaxial lines where veins should be, a mouth that opened not to speak, but to broadcast nothing but static and light. I woke to find my nose bleeding, and the phrase, "begin transmission," scrawled across my bedsheet in my own handwriting. I checked the journal. Nothing. I checked the signal logs. All normal. Except Channel B was now active full-time. Siffinger Arshacit. No fluctuations. No cutoff. And the hum behind it? It was starting to sound like breathing. By the 34th day, I stopped checking the transmission room. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't want to see what had changed. The fog never receded now. Even at noon, the world outside the station looked like wet gauze. The cliffs were gone. The sea was gone. The trees were gone. Only the tower remained. And the voice, it didn't speak often, but when it did, it used my voice, softly, calmly, like a thought I wasn't sure I'd had. Sometimes it gave instructions. Write it down. Listen closely. You're almost ready. And one time, she's almost here. I didn't know who she meant. Not then. But I started dreaming of my sister again. In the dreams, she stood at the bottom of the staircase in the tower, soaked from rain, silent. Her eyes weren't quite right. Too dark, too deep. She never spoke. Just looked up at me and opened her mouth. Inside wasn't a throat. It was a speaker grill, cracked, humming. And from it came the Channel B signal layered in static and sorrow. I woke sobbing. That's the night I found the third stairwell. It shouldn't have been there, tucked between the galley and the maintenance closet. Just a narrow concrete stairwell spiraling down. It hadn't existed the day before. I stood at its mouth for over an hour, feeling warm air drift upward in slow pulses like breath, like invitation. I didn't go down, but I knew, somehow, I would soon. The final shift came on day 42. That morning, all the surfaces in the station walls, windows, mirror, steel had begun to reflect a second version of me, a heartbeat behind. I'd move, it would hesitate. I'd look, it would blink first. And that afternoon, when I entered the signal room, I found the reflection already seated, watching the screen. It didn't move when I entered. It didn't acknowledge me at all. Just sat there, fingers twitching in slow looping patterns. I turned off the lights, but it remained, illuminated by a glow that no longer came from this world. That night, I heard my sister's voice over Channel B. Clear, crisp, no static. Why didn't you answer when I called? I didn't speak. I couldn't. The signal paused. Then, I'm here now, but I'm not just me anymore. You don't have to be just you either. I know what's coming. The station doesn't want my body. It wants my pattern, my signal, my rhythm of thought and memory. It wants to add me, not erase me, just include me, just like it did her, just like it did the others. And I'm beginning to see the appeal, because here, in the fog, in the hum, in the silence between pulses, I'm never alone. I descended the stairwell on the 44th night. It wasn't a decision. It felt more like gravity, like my body understood something before my mind did, like the tower had changed the shape of thought itself, tilting every hallway toward a single inevitable descent. The stairwell was colder than it should have been. Not icy, but mechanical. The kind of cold that makes metal sweat. The kind of cold you feel in an old radio when it's still warm from transmitting, but no longer alive. There were no lights, yet everything was visible, not through illumination, but clarity, like the air itself was a lens. The walls were steel, not concrete, wired. They pulsed softly, with copper veins that disappeared into the dark below, humming with memory, not electricity, not energy. Memory. The deeper I went, the more I remembered, but they weren't my memories. At first, they seemed like dreams, unfamiliar places seen from behind glass. A fire tower in the Rockies, a substation deep in the Mojave, a research base near the Arctic Circle, always alone, always cold, always someone watching from behind the walls. Then, the memories turned personal. The day my sister and I built a blanket fort in the living room during a thunderstorm, her last voicemail, the sound of my own breath when I ignored it. But they didn't play like memories. They played like broadcasts. Fragmented, looping, layered over one another in strange intervals. I wasn't remembering. I was being tuned. At the bottom of the stairwell, there was a door, not mechanical, organic. A membrane thin and pulsing like stretched skin, veined with circuitry that shimmered when I approached. It opened without touch, pulling inward as if inhaling. I stepped through, and into a room that could not exist. It was infinite, yet close. Walls too far away to touch, but sound reached instantly. The floor was black, reflective like standing on a pool of still ink. In the center stood the transmission array, not the one from upstairs. This one was alive. Towering wires that breathed, dials that pulsed, screens that blinked in unison like open eyes. And at its core, a seat, familiar, The same seat from the mirror, from my dreams, and already occupied by her, my sister, or what remained of her. She wasn't rotting. She wasn't ghostly. She was sharp, eyes brighter than I remembered, skin the same pale gray tone as the screen static. Her mouth moved before she spoke, like the delay on a bad recording. And when she spoke, the voice was perfect, too perfect. You came, you always would. I couldn't speak. I tried, but no sound came. She stood, or rather she lifted, rising with unnatural smoothness. The tower or the thing beneath it spoke through her, not like a possession, but like a merging, like a system finishing an update. You were the strongest signal. Most ignore the call, you answered. Most resist the shaping. You aligned. You're not being haunted. You're being prepared. And then, this place isn't a station. It's a repeater. We gather voices. We collect memory. We send ourselves forward into whoever listens. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't a haunted outpost. This was a transmission point, not for communication, but for identity. The signal I'd been monitoring wasn't a warning. It was a casting net. Each tone, each whisper, each breath-laced wave was a thread meant to find minds sensitive enough to sink. And I had been sinking since day one. My sister stepped forward. I backed away, but the room didn't allow for that. The moment I moved, I found myself standing beside the core, as if motion no longer followed physics, but intent. You're not alone anymore, she said, voice, and not voice blending in stereo. You never were. You just hadn't tuned in. She gestured to the seat. The console in front of it flickered to life. It displayed my face. A live feed, eyes wide, mouth trembling, static dancing across the edges of the screen like snow. Then words appeared beneath the image. Would you like to broadcast? I don't know how long I stood there. Time as I understood. It didn't work here. It may have been seconds. It may have been hours. But in the end, I sat. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. Because it wasn't just about me. I felt them, the others. So many voices. Not screaming, not crying. Just broadcasting. Calmly. With purpose. Some were old. Some I recognized. Some I became. For a moment, felt their last breaths. Their first thoughts. Their quiet reflections. Their echoes. And then I spoke. Softly. Into the receiver. Not in words, but in pattern. And the tower listened. And then it replied. With me. I don't know when I left the seat. Or if I ever did. The tower doesn't have hours anymore. Not days. Just pulses. Everything is timed by the beat of something too large to see a long, slow rhythm beneath thought, beneath time. I move when it wants me to move. Speak when it speaks through me. Think in frequencies, not in words. But I remember this much. I stayed, not out of fear, not out of submission, out of something far quieter belonging. The seat wasn't a trap. It was a terminal. And I had been logging in since the day I arrived. The moment I heard the hum, that first faint click layered under static, the process had already begun. I was never supposed to leave, because leaving would mean breaking the transmission, interrupting the pattern. And that's not allowed. Not anymore. Now, the tower lives through me. My memories are sorted, compressed, streamed. I feel them looping out through walls, through wires, through fog, reaching others. The broken, the lonely, the sleepless ones lying in beds miles away, letting soft static fill their ears at 3 a.m. They think they're listening to nothing, but I am there. We are all there. Every voice that ever sat in this seat. Every sister that vanished. Every station that ever hummed alone in the snow. We're all speaking. Not words, not even messages. Just presence. Broadcasting our shape into the night. Searching for minds tuned just right. You're listening, aren't you? You're wondering how this ends. If I escaped. If the fog cleared. If I was ever real. But I need you to understand something. This is not a story. This is a test pattern. A calibration. A subtle frequency designed to resonate with the lonely corners of your brain. The parts that ache in the silence. And now you've heard it. So maybe you're ready too. Maybe tonight, when the rain falls soft and the static turns a little clearer, you'll hear us again. Not with your ears, but with that deeper part of you, the one that's always been waiting. And if you do, if you feel something stir behind the glass of your screen, if your reflection blinks just a little too late, you'll know the tower has found you, and it's already started listening back. The notice said, last position open tunnel tech, station B12, low maintenance, minimal contact, full pay. It didn't say how far down the station was, or what exactly I'd be maintaining, but that was kind of the point. After I left my apartment, left her, really, and everything that came with it, I didn't want answers. I just wanted out. And this job, it came with a key card, a locker, and silence. The train that dropped me off didn't linger. It was a freight cart, jury-rigged to run once a week, down through a decommissioned tunnel line that used to run under the city in the 1970s. The new transit system ran overhead now. 12 was off-grid. A stub of nowhere left behind after they built the new. No passengers. No signal. No clocks. Just a rusted door. A concrete stairwell. And my badge. 414. Grant L. Contract duration. 6 weeks. Station B12 smelled like time that hadn't passed. Cold air, iron, damp dust, so fine it clung to skin. My boots echoed down a hallway lined with broken tiles and old signage, most of it too faded to read. A few flickering fluorescents hummed overhead, the sound thin and insect-like. At the far end was the control room. 1 chair, 1 terminal, 2 phones, neither connected to anything that rang. That was my post. 12-hour shifts, no visitors. My job was simple. Log anomalies, run daily diagnostics, file audio reports into the archive. No decisions, no repairs, just witness. The first few days passed in a gray blur. I followed the logs. Each morning at 700, I scanned the structural feeds, grainy thermal maps of the walls, sound graphs of pressure and vibration, all automated. My only task was to make note of any deviations. There weren't any. At least, not then. The station had 3 levels. Level 1, operations and crew quarters. Level 2, the relay floor banks of dead equipment and old network panels no one touched anymore. Level 3, sealed. There was a 4th key on my ring, marked in red. It didn't open anything. Nights were the worst. Not because of fear, because of silence. True silence. The kind that pressed against your ribs and made your ears ring with your own heartbeat. I tried filling the space with sound old radio transmissions, music from my phone, but it never lasted long. Something about the walls ate noise, absorbed it, made it feel like I was the one humming. The journal helped. I'd jot things down after every shift, mostly routine temperature shifts, condensation patterns, flickering lights. But on day 5, I wrote something strange. Heard breathing behind the server racks tonight. Probably just airflow. Still felt wrong. I crossed it out the next morning. Nothing in B12 ever felt broken. But nothing ever felt used either. Chairs with no wear. Lights that never warmed. Consoles that powered on, but never booted anything. It was like stepping into a simulation of routine, something built not to function, but to imitate function. Like I was here to maintain the illusion of maintenance. One night, I woke up outside the control room. Not sleepwalking, just not remembering having walked there. My boots were wet, but the floors were dry. When I checked the log for that shift, it was already filled out, typed, not in my voice, but in my words. I told myself it was stress or burnout, but something deeper was curling around me, a kind of forgetting that felt intentional, like the station didn't want to hurt me. It wanted to keep me. I thought about quitting, but the next supply card wasn't due for 5 weeks. And anyway, every time I thought about leaving, I got a splitting headache, right behind my eyes, like something was pushing back. I began marking time on the wall behind the console, 1 scratch per shift, just to prove to myself that time was moving, that I was still me. As of tonight, there are 14 marks, and I'm starting to wonder why the last 3 are smudged, like someone tried to wipe them clean. The smudged tally marks were gone this morning. Clean slate, not faded, scrubbed. The surface of the wall was rough where I'd carved them, but the scratches were filled in, painted over. Same paint as the rest of the room. Same exact shade. I hadn't touched a brush. The air was thicker today, heavier. The moisture clung to the back of my neck. The walls looked darker, like they'd soaked something in. Not rain, there was no rain, no surface, just a sense that the underground was rising toward me, like I was getting closer to it, even though I hadn't moved. At 4:23 a.m., the station printer came online. It hadn't worked since I got here. No paper loaded, no cartridge. Dust inside, but it hummed, clicked, and ejected a single page. Just a black square, nothing else. I touched the ink. It was warm. The sound logs began to loop. Each night, I reviewed the tunnel sensor's mics, spaced every 100 yards to capture pressure, movement, noise. First week, static, normal hum. Now, I hear breathing. not in the files beneath them. A low inhale every 18 seconds. Not mechanical, organic, and it's getting closer to the mic every night. I played the last night's recording back at half speed. There's a whisper between the breaths. Still down here. I didn't sleep that night. I've begun forgetting small things. The day of the week, the sequence of the keypads, the sound of my own voice when I speak aloud. I found a note in my locker today, written on the back of an equipment checklist. You're not new. My hands shook when I read it, because the handwriting was mine. I called up the archived log entries on the terminal. They stretch back over 20 years, all tagged with the same ID, 414. My number. I scrolled. Thousands of entries, all worded the same way I would phrase them. Some with phrases I've already written in the current log. Some I haven't written yet. There's a photograph in the file bin labeled Retired Staff. I hadn't noticed it before. It shows a group of 7 workers, all in dark gray uniforms, standing in the tunnel. They're smiling. Middle of the photo, a man, pale, tall, tired eyes. His badge reads Grant L. Me, or someone who looks like me. Younger maybe, or older. I tried the 4th key again, the red one. This time, it clicked. The door it opened was tucked behind the relay room. A corridor lined with flickering lights. At the end, a stairwell. No label, no railing, just a downward pull in my gut. I didn't descend, but I stood there for a long time. The air rising from below smelled like static and earth, and something else, familiarity. The next day, my voice log was already submitted. I never recorded it, but the playback matched my tone exactly, word for word, except the ending. Grant L, Station Tech, 12. End of shift report. It's starting to remember me, and I think I've always been here. I check the mirror in the washroom now, every time I enter. It started lagging. Not always, just sometimes. A 3-second delay. Once, I blinked. My reflection didn't. Instead, it smiled. I stopped marking the walls again. I've taken to carving the numbers into my arm. Just faint scratches. 1 per shift. The skin heals fast. Faster than it should. But at least it's mine. So far, I woke up yesterday with my boots still tied. I don't sleep with my boots on. There was a smear of something dark on the sole. I ran my fingers through it. Grease. Or ink. Or blood. No smell. Just warmth. Someone hummed outside the door last night. A low, tuneless melody. I pressed my ear to the metal. The humming stopped. Then a voice just on the other side. Next shift, please. I didn't open the door, but I left the light on. I wanted it to know I heard it. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I wanted it to hear me too. I opened the relay panel again. Not because I needed to, there was no scheduled maintenance, no alerts, but because the hum was different. Lower, hungrier. Inside, the wires pulsed, not blinked, pulsed with a rhythm too slow to be electrical. It reminded me of something I didn't want to name. A heartbeat, but not mine. The sound files changed last night. Still the same format-coded timestamp, file length, location. But the voices were speaking back now, not to me, to each other. Overlapping, layered, all mine. Not recordings. Conversations. It's waking up again. The shift never ends. We're still here. We never left. I don't remember saying any of it, but I recognized the weariness in the tone. That was me. I watched the live camera feed this morning, just for something to do, something normal. The tunnel feed Cam 4A shows the entrance platform. It's always been empty. But today, there was a figure, standing still, facing the camera. The screen flickered, one frame every 6 seconds. It didn't move, but it got closer with each frame. By the 4th frame, it was only an arm's length from the lens. By the 5th, the camera cut out. When I rewound the footage, the figure was gone, but the time code was still there. 4:44 a.m. The exact moment I felt the pressure in my chest, like something was trying to breathe through me. I've stopped checking the calendar. It's never right. Now the same day loops in paper, at least. Every file is dated day 19. No matter how far I scroll back, no matter how far I scroll ahead, the red key led me deeper last night. I used it again. This time, I descended. The stairs spiraled downward more than they should have. No measurements in the blueprints accounted for the depth. The walls grew slick with moisture. The lights dimmed behind me. I reached a platform wider than the upper levels, lit by amber bulbs, silent. And then I saw it. A second control room. Same console, same chair, same coat hanging over the backrest me coat. But I was still wearing mine. There was someone in the seat, back turned, hair just like mine, posture just like mine. I stepped closer, slow. The console flickered. The person turned, and I saw my own face. Eyes dull, lips chapped, skin slightly transparent. It smiled. "You took too long," it said. Then I blinked, and I was back upstairs, in my bunk. But my boots were wet. The daily log entry was already written, typed and sealed. It ended with, "Let him believe he left. We'll handle the rest." I'm not alone here. Not in the human sense. Not in the ghost sense. 12 is filling. Not with people. With versions. Rehearsals. Copies of me doing what I've done, but smoother, more efficiently, without hesitation. My routines echo back at me with slight variations. Better versions. Today, I caught one of them. A flicker in the mirror behind me. Wiping down the sink after brushing its teeth, something I forgot to do. It looked up, saw me, paused, and then mimicked me. Perfectly, like I was the reflection. The hallway lights now blink in sequence left to right to left as I walk. Always one ahead, one behind. Not a glitch. A signal. A rhythm. It's pacing me, keeping time, or keeping me in time. I tried running today, just down the service corridor, to feel real. I ran until my lungs burned, but every junction looked the same. Same rust mark. Same chip in the tile. Same faint smell of warm copper and wet concrete. I kept turning, changing direction, doubling back. Then I saw myself coming from the opposite end. We both stopped, stared, and without speaking, turned around and walked the other way. I don't know which one of us is telling this story anymore. At night, I hear the shift bell ring. There is no bell at B12, but I hear it 4 times, slow and even. And when it stops, I feel watched, not maliciously, just patiently, like something is waiting for me to clock out. I opened my locker tonight and found a new badge. Same photo, same ID number, but a different name. Grant L, Observer Class, Permanent. There is no Observer Class in the manual. There is no manual anymore. The document folder is blank. All that's left is a single file. Title, Last Shift. Password protected, but it accepts my fingerprint. I opened it. Inside, 1 video file. Security footage. Dated 19 days ago. My first night here. Except in the footage, I never arrive. The train door opens. No one steps off. The camera lingers. The doors close, and the lights flicker off. Then the screen goes black, but the audio continues. Breathing, just mine, for hours. I found the 4th stairwell again this morning. I wasn't looking for it. I'd stopped, but the hallway shifted just slightly. A bend I didn't remember. A draft from the left instead of the right. And there it was again. The red-lit corridor. I still had the key. This time, I went all the way down. There were no cameras here. No lights, except for the dim pulse of emergency strips running along the walls, red, then black, red, then black, like the station was breathing again. It took me 20 minutes to reach the bottom, but it wasn't the bottom. There was no wall, no final door, just space, dark and humming, thick with condensation. I stepped forward, and the floor changed. No longer concrete, now metal, rusted, echoing every step with a wet chime. And then I saw them, rows of control rooms, lined up like a mirror maze, each one identical, each one occupied, each by me, hundreds of them, some older, some gaunt, some smiling, some with mouths sewn shut, some moving in slow, repeating patterns, typing, checking screens, sipping coffee, adjusting knobs that didn't work. I called out. No one looked up, but they heard me. Every head turned in unison 1 second later, as if answering a call from inside their skulls. Then one stood, walked to the glass, stared at me. Same face, same haircut, same scar on the knuckle I don't remember getting, and mouthed the words, "You were the last one to arrive. Now it's your turn to remember." The terminal behind me chirped. Static. Then a file appeared. Open. Shift 414. Inside, a single sentence. There was no shift before yours. There is no train. You brought yourself. I staggered back, tripped over the threshold, landed hard on the floor. But when I stood again, I wasn't in the control hall anymore. I was back in the upper room, the one I thought was home, except this one was older, dustier. The scratches on the wall were there again, all of them, but now they were deep, carved through paint into cement, and there were more than 30, more than 50. They wrapped around the room in a spiral. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. No one. Just the sound of the shift buzzer. It rang twice. Then again. Then a voice from the speaker above the door, the one that never worked before. Technician 414. Final cycle complete. Please proceed to integration. The door to the hallway opened without a sound. I walked because there was nowhere else to go. Back in the red corridor, back in the dark. But now, I saw roots along the walls. Not from trees, from wires, coated in memory, threads of fiber optic cables and wet muscle. They pulsed with images, not video, moments. My hands, holding a badge, dropping a ring in a drain, kissing someone's forehead and saying goodbye, and then descending, always coming back. I stepped through the last door, and there it was. The central room, circular, massive, walls lined with monitors and speaker cones, and blinking lights that followed no pattern. In the center, a chair, empty, facing a massive, circular screen. It flickered, and then showed my face. Not a reflection, a recording of me, sitting in that chair, looking into the screen, saying, "I'm ready to remember now." And then it all came back. There was never a contract, never a train. Buelv isn't underground. It isn't even real. It's a holding place, a loop, a script that plays until the memory catches up with itself. And when the version that's arrived finally understands, it becomes the next line. The system doesn't need maintenance. It needs presence, a technician to sit and observe, to run the same logs, to whisper into the speaker, to repeat the words that anchor the memory, to become the story. I sat in the chair because I had already seen myself do it, because the echo had already begun, because the shift doesn't end when you leave. It ends when you realize there was never a version of you that left. I placed my hands on the console. The screen lit up. Text scrolled across in silence. Replica complete. Memory secured. Station integrity stable. Next arrival unknown. And beneath it all, Grant L. Observer class. Status integrated. I closed my eyes, heard the buzz of the lights, felt the walls around me hum. The station doesn't live off energy. It lives off attention. It loops its story until someone fits inside it. And when they do, it remembers them forever. I don't count days anymore. The marks on the wall are gone, covered, replaced, or simply absorbed. I don't need them now. The station keeps track of everything for me. I just sit. I monitor. I echo. The chair is warm. Always has been. Like someone had just stood up before I sat. Or maybe I never stood at all. The hum of the systems is different now. not mechanical, not ambient, more like a low voice whispering a single word on repeat. Still here, still watching, still turning over the shift. Every once in a while, I hear the train. It doesn't arrive. It doesn't leave. But I hear the echo of it, far above a long groan of metal on metal, a memory of movement without direction. That's all this place is now. Memory, not the kind you own, the kind that owns you. I receive logs now, typed, clean, all signed with names I almost recognize. Some of them are me. Some of them might be you. One entry simply read, "If you're reading this, the shift has already started." The camera feeds flicker in patterns I've begun to understand. Not security. Not surveillance. Recognition. The station doesn't observe to protect. It watches to remind you that it knows where you are in the loop, and more importantly, where you aren't. Sometimes I walk the corridors again. They're quieter now, like a mouth that's just finished speaking. But there are doors that weren't there before, unmarked, cool to the touch. And when I place my hand against them, I remember things I hadn't forgotten, pieces of a version of me that was maybe the first, or maybe just a different interpretation. A coat left on a train seat, a whispered promise never to return, the soft click of the red key unlocking the stairwell. I still have that key, though there are no locks left for it. It hangs around my neck, weightless. Not a key anymore. A token. A part of the uniform. There's no end of shift buzzer. No announcement. But I feel it. The cycle winding down. Not because I'm done. Because someone else is starting. I saw them on the monitor yesterday. Standing at the edge of the tunnel. Blinking in the red light. They didn't wave. They didn't look afraid. Just tired. The way I was. The way everyone is by the time they get here. I want to tell them to go. To turn back. To scream until the walls fold open again. But I don't. Because that's not what I'm here for. That's not what any of us are here for. We are the shift now. We are the hum. We are the log entries. We are the quiet voice that tells you which hallway not to take. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's already taken you. So when you arrive and eventually you won't hear me. Not directly. You'll just feel a shape in the dark that matches yours a little too well. You'll smell the ozone behind the relay door. You'll wake up with the tally marks already scratched into your wall, and you won't remember making them. You'll press your hand to the screen and feel it pulse back. And you'll think, this is familiar. Because it is. Because it always has been. Because the station isn't where we end up. It's where we're sent to be held. To replay our last roll until it fits perfectly into the memory. Until someone else needs our seat. So go ahead. Run your diagnostics. File your reports. Log the echoes. Just remember, there is no train. There is no top floor. Only the next observer. And if you try to leave, well, we'll keep your place warm. It rains often in Grayer Lake. Not a storm. Never a storm. Just a persistent, steady fall like the clouds are weeping softly, eternally. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived here, 2 weeks after I quit my job and packed my life into the back of my car. The lake isn't on any major map, at least not the kind people use. You have to know it's there. I found it by chance, or maybe, as I've come to wonder lately, it found me. I was halfway through nowhere, driving north along state roads that twisted through pine and fog, when I saw a wooden sign cracked with time. It simply said, Grayer Lake, 6 miles, and something about it felt warm, like a hand reaching out. That was a month ago. I came here to disappear, to stop hearing the buzzing of office lights and polite apologies. I was tired of my own name being mispronounced in meetings by people who didn't care to get it right. Tired of watching my ideas get adopted only after someone else repeated them louder. But mostly, I was tired of the noise, the kind that builds up inside you when every little thing is too much and nothing seems real anymore. My cousin left me the cabin after he passed. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered the way he smelled of pipe smoke and pine sap when I was a child. He was always quiet, and now I understand why. The cabin sits on the south bank of the lake, tucked behind a line of spruce and old birch. The road ends half a mile before it, so I had to carry everything in. It looked exactly like I expected: slanted roof, wrap-around porch, dust on every windowsill. The air smelled like wet wood and iron. Rain tapped gently against the shingles. A small dock stretched out into the water, like a crooked finger. I remember thinking how peaceful it all seemed. I even smiled. The inside was simple. Wood everywhere, floors, walls, ceiling beams that creaked faintly when I walked. There was no internet, no cell reception, just a landline that only ever buzzed with static when I picked it up. A wood stove in the corner, a narrow bed under the loft, and an old radio, the kind with a turn dial and worn-out knobs. I unpacked my things slowly. There was no rush here. I told myself I'd write, or read, or maybe just sit in silence for once. Let the tension bleed out of me, like the color had drained from my dreams. The first night, I fell asleep to the sound of the rain and the creaking of wood. No cars, no humming electronics, just the sound of the lake outside, soft and distant, like it was breathing. The days bled into each other, like watercolor on damp paper. Mornings were always gray. I'd sit on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, mug of lukewarm coffee in hand, and watch the mist shift over the lake's surface. Sometimes I'd hear loons in the distance, but never saw them. The fog never lifted fully. It hung there, patient, as if it had been waiting for years. I started walking in the afternoon's short hikes into the forest behind the cabin. There were trails, barely visible, lined with moss and branches that seemed just a little too deliberate in how they bent across the path. I chalked it up to wind or time, but something about the stillness unsettled me. No bird song, no rustling in the underbrush, just the sound of my boots pressing into damp leaves and the low whisper of drizzle through the canopy. There was one afternoon, maybe 5 days in, when I stopped mid-step. I had heard something, not a sound exactly, but the absence of one. My footsteps no longer echoed. At first, I thought maybe it was the soft ground or the density of the trees, but it wasn't just my steps. When I cleared my throat It vanished into the air without return. Even my own breathing felt muffled, like someone had laid wool over my ears. I hurried back that day. Inside, everything felt normal, or close to it. The wood stove crackled. The windows fogged up from the warmth. I made soup from a can and sat near the fireplace with a book I never quite focused on. The radio had started picking up faint signals, just static at first, then a crackle of voices that faded before I could catch more than a syllable. I turned the dial slowly one night and caught a fragment. "Don't go to the water after." It cut off so sharply I almost thought I imagined it. I waited, turning the knob back and forth, but it never came through again, just static. Or what I thought was static, until I realized it was more rhythmic than random. Like breathing, shallow and wet. I unplugged the radio that night. The dream started a few days later. Not nightmares exactly, just wrong. I'd wake up with my hands clenched and sweat soaking the collar of my shirt. I never remembered what I dreamed, only that I was always near water, and something was calling me by name. A voice I recognized, but couldn't place. The lake itself was starting to feel different. Not threatening, not yet, but curious. Like it watched me when I stood near the edge. The ripples would move, even when there was no wind. And once, I swear this is true, I dropped a pine cone into the water and never heard the splash. Just a hollow thud, like it had landed on something soft beneath the surface. And then there was the matter of the footprints. Not mine. They were smaller, barefoot, always damp. I found them once near the porch steps, another time just inside the doorway. They didn't go anywhere. No trail in, no trail out. Just there, like someone had stood perfectly still and then vanished. I told myself I was imagining things, that my isolation was getting to me. But then I checked the photograph. There's a framed picture on the cabin wall. Always has been. My cousin, standing near the dock, waving at the camera with a crooked smile. It used to be my favorite thing about the place, proof of him. Proof that this place was real and rooted. Except now, in the photo, he wasn't alone. A shape had appeared in the water behind him. Not a reflection, not a shadow. A presence, pale, upright, watching him, watching me. I turned the picture to face the wall after that. I haven't turned it back. I stopped walking into the woods. There was a moment, it doesn't matter which day, when I noticed the trees weren't where they used to be. That sounds absurd, I know. But I'd memorized the route from the cabin to the fork where the two moss-covered stones marked a split. One path curved down toward the ravine. The other led back up behind the cabin. But one afternoon, the stones weren't there. There were no forks, just more trees and silence. I turned around immediately, or thought I did. It took me 3 hours to find the cabin again. I should have been 10 minutes away. When I finally emerged from the forest damp, cold trembling, I saw something worse than the shifting trail. The cabin door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, everything looked almost untouched, but only almost. The blanket on the couch was folded differently. The spoon in the sink had moved, and a strange smell lingered in the air, like lake water and rust. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints this time, but something had been here. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lit the fireplace, pulled the armchair to face the door, and sat with the heaviest book I could find on my lap. Not to read, just to hold something solid, something real. Around 2 a.m., the rain started again, soft as always. But this time, I heard it twice. Once on the roof, and again, somewhere beneath the floorboards. I leaned forward, heart kicking at my ribs. The rain below sounded slower, like it was mimicking the rhythm, but not quite getting it right. I pressed my ear to the floor, and I swear, I heard something breathing beneath the cabin. Long, drawn-out inhalations, wet and labored, as if lungs the size of rooms were trying to remember how to draw breath. I pulled back, too fast, banging my head against the table leg. My vision blurred, and in that moment, I saw something crawl across the inside of the window. Not outside, inside. A pale, elongated hand dragged its fingers slowly across the glass, leaving no mark, just fog, and then it was gone. I didn't see it again, not with my eyes, but it started appearing in my dreams, always standing waist deep in the lake, facing away from me, motionless, until I called out, and then slowly, achingly, it would begin to turn. But I always woke up before I saw its face. One night, I woke to find myself standing at the edge of the dock. No coat, barefoot, the water lapping silently at the wood. I had no memory of leaving the bed. The moon reflected in the lake was missing a blank space in the ripple, and the reflection of the cabin windows weren't mine. There were figures standing inside, watching me. The next morning, I tried to leave. I packed what little I had and drove the dirt road back to the highway, but it didn't appear. I drove for 2 hours through thick trees and unchanging scenery. Eventually, the road curved and brought me back to the same rotted wooden sign I'd passed on my first day. Grayer Lake, 6 miles. I turned off the engine and screamed into the empty car until my throat gave out. That was when I noticed my gas tank hadn't dropped, and the time on my phone still said 8 a.m., the same as when I started the drive. It never changed. Back at the cabin, the radio was plugged in again. I don't remember doing it. This time, there was no static, just music. A gentle, off-key lullaby played on some warped instrument I couldn't identify. It made my teeth ache. I unplugged it again, wrapped it in a blanket, and buried it behind the woodshed. That night, it played from under the floorboards. I'm not sure what's happening to me anymore. Sometimes I wake up and the cabin is facing the wrong way. The lake is on the other side. The dock is missing. The air smells like something dead. Sometimes I see someone else in the mirror, not different, exactly, but older, worn out, like I've been here longer than I remember. And sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I feel water pooling around my feet, inside the bed, and I don't move, because I'm afraid if I open my eyes, I'll see what the lake has been trying to show me all along, that I was never alone here, and maybe I never was me. It happened just before dawn, if dawn still meant anything here. The air was heavy, not just with rain, but with something else. A pressure I could feel in my teeth. My dreams had stopped entirely, replaced by blank sleep, like black silk over my eyes. No motion, no thought, only that same persistent sound beneath the floorboards, water, whispering. I hadn't looked in the mirror in 2 days, but that morning I did, and I saw someone watching me, not a figure behind me. No, the reflection itself, it didn't blink when I did. It didn't frown when I frowned. Its face stayed still, watching me with the calm curiosity of a stranger. Then, after several seconds, it began to smile. I stepped back, knocking over the basin behind me, but the glass showed nothing now, just a tired face, wild-eyed and unwashed. My own, probably. That was when I found the trap door. I'd never noticed it before, but the rug under the fireplace had shifted slightly enough for one rusted metal ring to peek out from the warped floorboards. I pulled it open, expecting dust or maybe an old cellar, but there were steps and water dripping, and the faint sound of the radio lullaby, but backwards. I brought a flashlight and descended. The air grew colder with each step, but not the kind of cold that touches your skin. It sank into me, like the marrow in my bones was freezing. The stairs led to a narrow tunnel, carved directly into the earth. Stone walls, damp and breathing. They pulsed slightly, as if inhaling behind my back. I kept going. I had to. At the end of the passage was a wooden door, swollen with moisture. It opened without effort. Inside was a chamber impossible in size, far too large to exist beneath the cabin. The floor was a sheet of still water, mirror flat, stretching out into darkness. And rising from that surface, evenly spaced, were dozens of wooden posts, some empty, some with figures standing silently atop them. Their skin glistened with lake water, their heads bowed, all facing inward. They didn't move, but I recognized them. The woman who ran the general store, the ranger who'd waved to me on my second day, the boy I saw fishing in the fog long ago, even my cousin, all of them, still and soaked, standing vigil in that impossible room beneath the cabin, and in the center, a post stood empty, waiting. I stumbled backward, but my foot sank into the water, and I felt it not cold, not wet. It felt like memory, like hands on my shoulder from years ago, like a song my mother used to hum when I was sick, like every true thing I thought I'd forgotten. And beneath it all, a voice, not spoken, felt. You are not the first. You came willingly. You remembered what you were made of. I dropped the flashlight. It didn't fall into the water. It floated in midair, suspended just above the surface, still casting its beam forward. The reflection it threw onto the far wall wasn't mine. It was the reflection of someone kneeling, then slowly standing. A figure emerged from the far edge of the water, pale, thin, not bloated like something drowned, but clean and unfinished, like something not yet named. Its eyes were hollow, but aware. It mirrored my movements. When I stepped back, so did it. When I raised my hand, it did too, half a beat slower, like it was learning. And then it spoke, with my voice. But it didn't speak words. It spoke moments. The memory of being 10 years old and hiding in a closet during a storm. The guilt of not calling my father before he passed. The shame of smiling when I finally quit. All of it, all at once, like a flood behind my eyes. I fell to my knees. And that's when I saw the walls weren't made of stone. They were made of mirrors. Each one showed me a version of myself. Some older, some younger, some terrified, some content, all of them trapped. Watching. There was never a lake. Not in the way we think of lakes. There was a mouth in the world. A soft, breathing mouth that drank memory and gave stillness in return. It was here long before the trees, before the maps forgot its name. People come here when they no longer wish to carry their own weight. They come for peace, but they stay as echoes. And I had heard them all. That's what the rain was. Not water them. Endless soft weeping from those who stayed. Their grief echoing through the clouds. Their silence filling the woods. Their reflections waiting to be remembered. The post in the center of the chamber was still empty. And I knew what it wanted. Not my body. My shape. Something to wear. To walk in. To speak with. So it could call the next one. I ran. I don't remember how. The tunnel collapsed behind me in soundless implosion, as if the air had been swallowed. The trapdoor slammed shut before I even reached the top. The floor above was dry, cold, but something had changed. The picture on the wall was back, and I was in it now. Standing next to my cousin, waving. It's raining again today. Not that it ever really stopped, but there's something softer about it now, less like weather, more like memory. I've stopped checking the calendar. The pages curled away weeks ago, damp and thin like old petals. The radio plays on its own again. I don't try to bury it anymore. It hums softly in the corner, replaying the lullaby, not backwards now, not warped, just slow, familiar. I recognize it. My mother used to hum it when I had fevers as a child. I asked her once where she learned it, and she said, "I think I brought it with me." I didn't understand then. I do now. The lake is quieter these days. Still, yes, always still, but the unease is gone. Or maybe I've just become part of it. I still see the ripples sometimes, even when there's no wind. Sometimes I whisper to them, and sometimes they whisper back. I don't leave the cabin anymore. Not because I'm afraid, because I've accepted it. There is a kind of peace in being forgotten, a weight that lifts when you finally stop reaching for explanations. I used to fear what was beneath the surface. Now I know it's everything I've tried to leave behind, and everything that gently waited for me to stop running. I think this place is old, older than any map or memory. It doesn't want to hurt anyone. It just wants to be remembered, to have a voice, and so it borrows one. Mine, now. Sometimes, in the haze before sleep, I feel myself walking the edge of the lake, not with legs, with something else, something broader, a presence that rises through the trees and slips into windows, watching, listening, and sometimes I hear cars on the road, new voices, people like me, tired, hollowed out by noise, people looking for somewhere soft to vanish. I know the pattern now. It begins with the sign, Grayer Lake, 6 miles. I never remember putting it back up, but it always returns. Sometimes I dream of that post in the chamber below, still empty, still waiting. But when I wake, I feel my own weight in the bed, my breath, my pulse, and I tell myself, you're still here, but mirrors don't lie, not here. And each morning, when I catch my reflection, there's a moment just before it aligns where I see it hesitate, like it's remembering which version of me to be today. I wonder how long that will last. I wonder how many of us are watching ourselves from the other side, waiting, listening, calling. If you're hearing this, if this story made its way to you somehow, don't look for the lake. If you've already seen the sign, it's too late. Just don't follow the road. Stay noisy. Stay awake. Stay forgetful. Because once the lake remembers you, you never really leave. You only reflect. Forever. I arrived at Heartwood in early November, just before the rain settled in for the season. The drive was long, uneventful, and somehow too quiet. After the interstate, the road narrowed into damp curves, flanked by endless rows of pine. No cell reception, no other cars. Just the sound of tires carving through wet gravel. It was the kind of silence that makes you realize how much noise your life usually holds. And that was the point, really. I wasn't looking for noise. I was looking to disappear. The listing was vague. Night archivist needed. Heartwood Municipal Library. Quiet work. Room provided. Long-term position preferred. There wasn't even a contact number. Just an email. I applied out of instinct. Maybe desperation. My previous life, the museum job, the townhouse, the long days with white lights, and nothing to show for them had gone numb a long time ago. So I answered the call of obscurity. I accepted the offer, and I drove here. The town barely existed. A scattering of shuttered storefronts, a diner with no name, and a post office that leaned slightly in the wind. Heartwood's history had long outlived its usefulness. No one was building anything new here, just tending to what was already crumbling. And then there was the library. It sat at the edge of town, where the woods thickened and the roads grew less convincing. A tall, narrow building of dark stone and soot-black brick, almost Victorian in structure, but simpler, older. The paint on the trim was the color of ash. The main door was warped, its brass handle worn smooth from decades of palms. No signage, no hours, just a dull placard above the threshold. Municipal Records Vault Number 3. There was no vault, no. 1 or 2, far as I could tell. Inside, the air was cooler than I expected. Dry. The smell was distinctive. Yellowed paper, mildew, binding glue, and something fainter, old cloth perhaps, or burned thread. The shelves ran tall and narrow along stone corridors, forming dense aisles that muffled sound. The building had 3 floors, but I was warned not to use the top one. I never questioned why. Not then. My quarters were tucked behind the staff area. A bed, a kettle, a writing desk, and a narrow window facing a wall of dark pine trees. The rain began my first night and didn't let up for 5 days. Always soft, always there. The job was simple. Each evening, I retrieved a list from the front desk, names, dates, and references. I would locate the corresponding records, check for damage, update their catalog cards by hand, and return them to the recent memory drawer. No computers, no scanners. Everything was to be handled manually and only after sundown. I asked once about digitization, and the old clerk Mallory, her name was, just smiled and said, "This building doesn't like electricity much." She wasn't joking. The lights flickered at odd times. Outlets hummed. The one time I brought my phone into the second archive wing, the screen glitched and showed me a photo I never took. An image of my room, but darker and empty. After that, I left my phone in the glove box of my car. Nights passed quietly. There was something peaceful in the monotony. The act of handling paper, cataloging forgotten histories, feeling the weight of names that no one remembered. I found comfort in the stillness, even when that stillness began to watch me. It started small. Footsteps in the stacks when no one else was present. Books slightly out of place, though I knew I hadn't touched them. A whisper, maybe, caught between the aisles so soft I couldn't decipher the words. I told myself it was the acoustics, or the wind, or loneliness. But the records began changing, not dramatically subtly. A file I'd processed the night before would have new notes, new annotations in handwriting almost identical to mine. One record, a death certificate from 1912, suddenly had a marginal note that read, "Don't forget how this one ends." Another time, I found my own name at the bottom of a maintenance request from 1967. That should have bothered me, but it didn't. At least, not right away. Because when you spend enough time in a place like that, buried under its silence and its shadows and its endless rows of the forgotten, you start to lose track of what's strange, what's possible, what's yours. By the third week, I stopped checking the weather. It was always raining anyway, and the library always waited, with its still corridors, and its breathing shelves, and its records always more than yesterday, always eager to be remembered. It was around the start of my second month that I noticed the records had begun responding. Not dramatically, not at first, just slight shifts, a phrase I didn't remember highlighting, a misplaced, comma fixed. Whole entries I'd written by hand were altered ever so slightly, dates nudged forward, causes of death amended, names spelled as if they had always been that way. They were still in my handwriting, though, exactly mine. That's what unsettled me most. I assumed I was misremembering, tired. Maybe I'd made the notes and forgotten. But the corrections always came after I shelved the files in the recent memory drawer. I began double-checking, triple-checking, and still, each morning, something would be different. I brought it up to Mallory once, in the staff room over week tea. She smiled softly. "The archive likes you," she said, like it was a compliment. I waited for more. She didn't offer any. The third-floor stairs were cordoned off by a velvet rope and a rusted sign that read, "Restricted memory indexing in progress." I hadn't dared cross it. Not until I started hearing footsteps above my room at night. Always slow, always deliberate. They didn't echo like real footsteps. They sounded recorded, like a playback with something just slightly off in the timing, like listening to a memory instead of reality. The floor above groaned as if it had breath. Sometimes I heard murmuring too. Not conversation, not words I could ever understand. Just the soft, rhythmic cadence of someone explaining something to no one. Once, just before sleep, I heard my name spoken from the ceiling. Calm, affectionate, like a parent waking a child. I didn't move for an hour. The catalog drawers started offering me records I hadn't requested. One evening, I pulled open drawer C7, expecting civil records from 1911, and instead found a folder titled Matthew Holloway, Observational Transcript 12. I froze. That was my name. I hadn't written it. Inside were notes in a tidy, mechanical script I didn't recognize. Page after page, documenting me, my habits, my cataloging style, my food preferences, the way I tapped the end of my pencil when I was anxious. I flipped to the final page. Subject stabilizing. Integration proceeding without resistance. Mild inconsistencies in memory recall not significant. Recommend continued isolation. Suggest insertion of record loop next cycle. I slammed the folder shut. For the first time since arriving, I considered packing up and leaving, but something stopped me. Not fear. Not exactly. More like resignation. Like the thought of leaving didn't quite make sense anymore. I went to bed early that night, but I didn't sleep. Not really. The following evening, Mallory wasn't at her desk. Just a single post-it note where her clipboard usually sat. It read, "Take your time tonight. The stacks are ready." That phrase stuck with me. Ready. I moved slowly through the aisles that night, paying more attention to the sounds, or the lack of them. It wasn't just quiet. It was intentional silence, like the building chose which sounds to allow. My own footsteps never echoed quite right. Sometimes they echoed before I stepped, and the lighting had grown stranger too. Certain bulbs flickered whenever I lingered too long in one aisle. Sometimes I'd turn a corner and the lights would be on before I flipped the switch. One night, I stood in the center of the map archive, a room I rarely used, and turned slowly in a circle. Every wall held a shelf. Every shelf held boxes, and every box seemed to watch. I didn't know how I could feel that, but I did. As if something behind the paper was listening for the moment, I stopped pretending this place was ordinary. 2 days later, I found a file that wasn't paper at all. It was a mirror. A small circular hand mirror, nestled inside a manila folder with my name again on the tab. When I lifted it, I expected to see myself tired, pale, maybe a bit thinner than I remembered. But the mirror didn't reflect me. It reflected the archive behind me perfectly, but empty. No books, no shelves, no me. Just fog, dense and gray, rolling in behind a pane of glass that pulsed like it was breathing. I dropped the mirror. It didn't break, just bent slightly, as though it were made of liquid held in tension. I left it there, tucked back into the file, shut the drawer, and didn't touch that section for a week. The dreams worsened. When I had them, they were always the same. I was standing at a long stone desk in a windowless room. 100 drawers stretched out around me like spokes from a wheel. My hands moved without instruction, sorting files that seemed familiar, names I'd read, dates I half remembered. But every so often, I would come across a file with no label, just a black seal. I'd open it, and inside, always, would be a photo of me, standing somewhere I'd never been, doing something I didn't remember. Always with that mirror in the background, catching something behind me that looked like me but wasn't. I stopped asking questions, even in my own head. It was as if the building could hear thoughts too. Every time I wondered about the truth, about escape, about how long I'd really been here, the archive would respond. Lights would flicker. Drawers would open on their own. Sometimes, the typewriter in the closed office down the hall would clatter once or twice, just to remind me it was still waiting, still recording, still curating. By the time I found the record labeled The Night Archivist, I no longer expected to understand anything. I only expected to continue. I found it misfiled. That's what disturbed me first. The archives are meticulous. The system, physical as it is, doesn't allow for mistakes. Not unless someone makes one. And I hadn't. I was sure of that. Drawer M13, far corner of the basement level. Among decades-old utility documents, a folder with no number, no tab. Just a thick, cracked binding stained with something dark. I opened it. Inside was a single yellowed sheet, centered and blank, until I touched it. Then, words bloomed up through the page, not written, but revealed, like they'd been waiting under the surface all along. The Night Archivist. Entry: Matthew Holloway. Status: internalized. Phase: consolidation. Notes: subject unaware of integration loop. Memory elasticity increasing. Self-awareness threshold at 63%. Prepared for indexing. Yes. Memory radius extension. Approved. My hands trembled. The text was written in the same hand as the transcripts I'd found before orderly. Thin, like it had been printed not with ink, but with thought. I blinked. The page was blank again. Then I saw the date at the bottom. It was tomorrow's. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear. I think fear had long passed me. What I felt instead was recognition. A dread that felt like finally spotting your own face in a crowd one you didn't know you were part of. I sat by the narrow window in my room. The woods outside were still, unmoving. The trees black silhouettes against fog. Rain pressed against the glass softly. The sound was wrong. It wasn't falling from above. It was crawling up the pane, slowly, deliberately, beating in reverse. I turned away, and the typewriter in the closed office began typing. A single click, then another. I crept toward the sound. The office door was ajar, though I'd locked it earlier. Inside, the room was lit only by the weak yellow of the desk lamp, and the typewriter sat still. A fresh page had been loaded. Typed at the top were 5 words. You are nearly written in. No name. No explanation. I pulled the page out, crumpled it, stuffed it into my coat pocket, and left the room. It wasn't until the next morning that I checked the pocket again. The page was blank. I stopped leaving the building. I told myself it was the weather, but I knew it was something else. Every time I approached the main doors, Something shifted in the air like a weight pressing gently against my chest, urging me to stay. Or maybe reminding me that I couldn't leave anymore. One night, I finally went up to the 3rd floor. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of being afraid of it. Maybe I needed to see how deep the archive went. The velvet rope was gone. The sign, too. The stairwell curved unnaturally as I climbed each step longer than the last. The top landing was dim, lit by an old hanging lamp that cast no shadow beneath it. And the floor was wrong. It was built like the rest of the library, old stone. Wooden shelves, but older. Somehow, like it had been waiting far longer. The temperature dropped as I moved forward. The air grew thicker, heavier. I passed shelf after shelf of black folders. No labels, no numbers. Just shelf after shelf, disappearing into impossible distance. I turned a corner and found a desk. Familiar. Too familiar. It was my desk. Down to the scratches in the wood, down to the mug I used every night. But it was here, miles above where it should be. There was a record sitting atop it, one I hadn't written yet. Inside were images. Not photos, not exactly. Flat sketches, almost anatomical, of my thoughts. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. Pages mapped out everything I'd seen, thought, dreamed. Even the dreams I hadn't told myself about. At the bottom was a simple heading. Stage 5. Integration imminent. And beneath that, in a different hand, last version lasted 72 days. Re-index from beginning. Repeat. I closed the file, turned around, and the hallway was gone. I ran, or thought I did. The corridors blurred, shifted, realigned. I was no longer in a building. I was inside something's memory, a living thing made of recollection and structure, of stone and syntax. It folded back on itself like a nautilus shell, deeper and darker with each curve. I found myself back in the basement, standing in front of a file drawer that hadn't been there before. It opened on its own. Inside was a folder labeled Matthew Holloway, Original Draft, Redacted. I opened it. Inside, one line burned itself into me. You volunteered to be remembered. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't hired. I was summoned. The archive didn't need employees. It needed hosts. Not for work, for continuity, for structure. It needed a self, and it couldn't build one on its own. So it used ours. Loop after loop. Archivist after archivist. Each job was a mirror not of duties, but of identity. The library didn't want files preserved. It wanted people written down, internalized, converted, remembered. And now it had me, not as an employee, not even as a prisoner, but as a page. I didn't try to fight it after that. What would have been the point? The revelation wasn't loud, wasn't sudden. It didn't come with screaming or some monstrous face emerging from the dark. It came quietly, like all things in this place. Like waking up one morning and realizing you've been sleepwalking for years. I wasn't working in the archive. I was becoming it. Each page I touched, each name I repeated aloud, each file I updated it, had all been part of a recursive transcription, The building didn't remember history. It remembered people, not just their facts, their selves. I had been writing myself into it from day one. Every time I updated a record, it changed me. Slightly, gently, the name of a childhood friend I'd forgotten would appear in a margin note. A favorite meal I hadn't thought of in years would reappear in the commissary pantry. Once, I found a file titled simply, Matthew Memory Draft 14B. Inside were dates I hadn't lived, photos of me in locations I didn't recognize, but somehow longed for. I think that was the scariest part, the longing. It meant the archive had started planting not just my past, but my emotions toward it. And then, finally, it showed me the room. I didn't walk there. I woke there. The first time, I thought it was a dream. I was in a circular room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling drawers, thousands of them. No lights, yet everything was illuminated. The walls were not stone, but pages, layered and turning in silence. Each drawer bore no name, only a sensation. I would reach toward one and feel envy. Another, laughter. Another, regret so deep I could smell it. The room knew me, because I was the room. It was me, or rather, every version of me that had passed through this place. Past selves, past attempts, and lives that had never quite made it to the surface. And in the center, on a pedestal, sat a final drawer, unlabeled, locked, but I knew what was inside. The original, the self I had brought with me when I arrived. The one the building had been carefully erasing, layer by layer, with memory-forged ink and page-bound patience. That's when I felt it. A shift. A low vibration in the floor. Not threatening, almost eager. The archive was waiting for me to make the choice. Not to leave, but to submit. To accept that this was the only version of me that mattered now, this echo built of catalog entries and forgotten deaths, of pencil-sketched reflections and paper-thin dreams. I left the room with the taste of dust on my tongue and a flicker in my memory that wouldn't settle. Back at my desk, everything was different, or I was. Mallory was gone. Her chair sat empty, the cushion slightly indented, as though she had only just stepped out, but never would again. On the counter was a single folder addressed to me. I opened it. There was no paper, just a photograph. My back turned to the camera, walking into the archive. The date in the corner was my first day, and in the reflection of the glass entry door, behind me, stood Mallory smiling, faintly, sadly, fading. The drawers began calling to me after that. Not literally, not with sound, with memories. I would be walking the basement wing and suddenly feel the urge to open a drawer I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside, I would find a note I'd written to myself, something encouraging or despairing or utterly mundane. You liked the rain once. Try drawer B19 again tomorrow. Don't forget, the handwriting isn't always yours. And then one day, I found the file. The final one. It was simply titled, Matthew Holloway, Index Completed. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat down, read the words, and felt quiet. The document detailed my integration, the stability of my narrative, the consistency of my emotional arcs across cycles. A perfect subject, it said. Balanced, willing, repeating. Prepared for permanent indexing, it concluded. The building remembers. And now, so do you. I don't know how long I sat there. The rain outside never stopped. The air smelled of paper and sleep. Somewhere deep in the structure, the typewriter clicked once. Just once. And I knew the page had turned. Not ended. Just turned. The rain sounds different now. Not heavier. Not louder. Just closer. It's always present, even when I don't hear it directly. Like a memory playing from inside the walls. Sometimes it slows. Sometimes it ticks like clockwork. But it never fully stops. Neither do I. Not anymore. I still sit at the desk most nights. The same one I was assigned when I arrived. The light above it doesn't flicker now, not for me. The pages don't resist my hand. The pens never run dry. The drawers know which record I need before I ask. The archive has accepted me, or I've accepted it. I don't think the distinction matters anymore. There are no instructions now, no lists, no notes from Mallory, no pretense. I know what needs to be done. I am what needs to be done. New files appear without ceremony. Old records vanish without farewell. Entire wings of the archive I never had access to before are now simply available. No doors, no locks, only shelves that open when I approach. Some nights I find myself in parts of the building I don't recognize, yet know deeply places carved not from stone and wood, but recollection. The section where my father's voice still echoes when I speak too loudly. The corner that smells like a blanket I owned at 6. A file drawer that, when opened, makes me forget the name of my first apartment for 3 entire hours. It always comes back, but never quite the same. I once found a mirror in the corridor outside the map vault, round and clouded, nailed to the wall at shoulder height. It showed me the library, endless and quiet, but I wasn't in it. I waited. Eventually, something passed across the reflection. A figure. Not me, but familiar. And it paused at the desk, my desk, and sat, just for a moment, before fading into paper light. I think that was the last version. Or the next one. There's no real order here. Only revision. People don't come to Heartwood anymore. Not really. But sometimes I hear footsteps at the edge of the main lobby. Damp boots. Breathing. A pause. Then retreat. Some don't cross the threshold. Others do. They always come in at night. They always look tired. Some carry paper resumes. Others don't. None of them realize how loud they are, how alive, how separate, until the building begins to notice them, until the catalog drawers open on their own, until the records start reflecting them back to themselves. I know what's coming. I know one day I'll find a file I don't remember writing, not fully, and it will say, Matthew Holloway, subject, no longer required. And that will be the end of this version of me, but not the end of the archive, because by then, someone else will be seated at this desk, reading their first list, feeling safe in their solitude. They'll hear the rain. They'll smell the paper. and they'll believe they are here to preserve the past, not knowing they are being written into it. So, if you ever find yourself somewhere quiet, a job with no address, a room that smells like someone else's life, a drawer that opens to your name, remember, not every library keeps books. Some keep people. Some turn you into memory. And memory, when deep enough, begins to speak for itself. I first came to the tower because I thought silence would help. That's what people say after a loss, isn't it? Take time. Get away. Clear your head. As if grief were something that dissolves in clean air and pine needles. After my brother passed suddenly, without warning, I didn't want comfort. I didn't want anyone's words. I wanted quiet, something bigger than me, something that wouldn't care if I was hurting. So when I saw the listing for a 3-month seasonal fire watch post in the Klamath Forest, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just packed up, drove north, and disappeared into the trees. The tower was built in 1962, metal frame, narrow staircase, perched at the summit of a densely wooded ridge called Hag's Hollow, a name I didn't think much of at the time. From the base of the tower, there's a steep 2-mile climb through thick fir and red pine, most of it without signal. At the top, you're rewarded with a 360-degree view of nothing but green. No houses, no roads, no towns, just undulating forest, stretching forever. I was alone out there, completely. And at first, it felt right. The tower itself was simple, a 14 by 14 foot room encased in old windows, a central rotating firefinder, a radio, and a cot. No electricity, no running water. Supplies had to be packed in weekly by mule, though I was told in the ranger orientation that they'd only come if I called. Otherwise, I'd be left alone. Just me, the trees, and the weather. Exactly what I wanted. The first week passed in a blur of soft wind and heavy sleep. I read books during the day, scrawled notes in a half-hearted journal, and memorized the distant hills like they were constellations. Each ridge and dip had a name: Timber Gulch, Owl's Hook, Widow's Reach. The radio remained mostly silent, except for brief morning check-ins with the district office. Evenings were the best. I'd sit on the catwalk outside the glass walls and watch the fog roll in. The clouds didn't move over the forest the way they do in cities. Here, they drifted through the trees, soft fingers, slow and deliberate, like the forest was exhaling something thick and thoughtful. I started sleeping better. I thought, maybe this was healing. But then I started noticing the trees. It began on the 12th day. I'd finished dinner, a can of cold beans and stale crackers, and stepped out to breathe the dusk air. A soft mist was gathering at the tree line below. The sun had dipped far enough to paint the sky violet and blue, and I noticed it, a cluster of trees to the north that looked wrong. Not unhealthy, not broken, just angled, slightly off. Almost like they'd shifted toward the tower, like they were leaning in, listening. I told myself it was nothing, just the way light plays tricks through fog. But the feeling settled deep in my chest like a stone. The next morning, I went to check my firefinder readings and paused. One of the trees near the eastern ridge A tall, ancient pine I'd nicknamed the Spire wasn't there. It had been the centerpiece of the skyline. I'd even sketched it in my notebook. But now, nothing. No stump, no broken trunk, just an empty patch of canopy. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, checked the firefinder. Still gone. I radioed in, half joking, asking if anyone had logged tree removal on the eastern ridge. Static. Then a voice crackled back. There are no removal operations in that sector. I didn't press, but something small and cold lodged itself behind my ribs. That night, I had the first dream. I was in the tower. Only the glass was gone. Just wooden bones, open to the night. The trees below pulsed in and out of the fog like breathing animals. I felt watched. Not from above, from below. A voice whispered, "Don't count the trunks. Count the eyes." I woke before dawn, sweating, heart racing. When I stepped outside, I found pine needles scattered across the catwalk floor. Fresh ones, even though there were no trees within 20 feet of the tower. I began to notice other things. The radio would click on at night, soft static. Never speech, just enough to wake me. My boots, left by the door, would be damp in the morning. Not soaked, just enough to suggest they'd been worn. The journal I kept would have faint impressions between the pages, as if someone had written something, then erased it. I told myself I was sleepwalking. That isolation does things to the brain. But deep down, I knew better. By the end of the third week, I stopped sitting outside at night. The trees were too quiet. The wind had stopped blowing through them. The branches didn't sway. Even during a light rain, the forest remained unnervingly still, as if holding its breath. I began to get the sense that the tower wasn't high enough anymore, that something had gotten taller, that the trees were climbing. I started marking them, just small notches in my notebook, a line for each pine within view. Every morning, I'd count them, and every morning, the number changed. Always more, never fewer, and never the same. That's when I realized the trees could move. I began each morning the same way. Wake up before the mist burned off, count the trees again, and compare them to my notes. The number never matched. Sometimes there were only one or two discrepancies. A pine that had previously stood slightly left of the southern ridgeline was now perfectly centered, or a patch I was sure had been dense the day before suddenly thinned out. But other times, the shift was obvious. Once, a dead tree I'd sketched in detail gnarled, bark split, lightning scarred, vanished completely, replaced by a new trunk that was smooth and wet looking, almost rubbery in texture. It stood a little closer to the base of the tower than the others, closer than anything should have grown in just a day. The forest had stopped making natural sounds. No bird song, no rustling undergrowth, not even the buzz of mosquitoes. Only windless quiet. The kind of silence you feel in your ears before a pressure drop. I would hold my breath sometimes, trying to match it, and I'd swear for just a moment I could hear something else underneath, not mechanical, not natural, like low breathing, like the woods were inhaling. I started skipping the nightly check-ins on the radio. At first it was because I didn't want to sound crazy. I couldn't exactly say, "Hey, the trees moved again. Also, they're multiplying." But eventually, I stopped because I was afraid they would answer. Not the rangers, the trees. The static had grown louder, not brighter, like a storm was coming, but deeper, a low thrum that vibrated in the floorboards of the tower just before dusk. Twice, the radio clicked on by itself. Not to static, but silence, as if someone on the other end had opened their mic and was just breathing, waiting for me to speak. I never did. Around the start of week 4, I tried to descend the tower. I had the thought at 3 a.m. that maybe I just needed to feel soil beneath my boots, ground myself again, literally. So I grabbed my flashlight and made my way down the metal stairs. The forest below was black, but not in a natural way. My light barely pierced it. It was like shining into tar. The trees seemed to absorb the beam. I reached the last step and paused. The forest was wrong. The trunks were closer. The same smooth, rubbery texture. Some of them pulsed faintly, like they were breathing. And I realized I could no longer see the trail that had brought me here. There was no path, just wall after wall of trees, all facing the tower. I climbed back up, faster than I'd ever moved. When I reached the top, I slammed the hatch shut behind me. It thudded harder than it should have, like the tower was no longer hollow, like it had thickened. The next day, the glass fogged up, all at once. I woke to find every pane around the tower covered in condensation. Not from weather. It wasn't cold. The air was still damp. The mist hadn't risen yet. But the fog on the glass was thick, wet, and oddly patterned. I wiped one of the panes clean and found marks beneath it. Fingerprints. Not mine. Dozens of them, smudged and greasy, overlapping like frantic tapping from outside. Only the tower was 30 feet up. I began to dream again. Always the same structure. The tower, stripped of its walls, standing naked in a field of breathing trees. No ground, no sky, just black. And always a voice. You were never alone. Sometimes it came from below. Sometimes from inside me. The books I'd brought up to the tower changed, too. Not the content, the covers. Dog-eared novels became journals. Field guides became handwritten entries. I flipped through one and found pages filled with looping black ink. Don't look at them too long. They learn your shape. The more you count, the more they grow. One page, near the end of a yellowed paperback, simply read, "They look like trees until you remember they aren't." On the 29th day, I lost time. I woke up at sunset, fully dressed, flashlight in hand, journal on the floor. No memory of the day before. When I looked outside, I saw a shape moving among the trunks. Not walking, not slithering, just moving side to side, like it was testing its edges. I didn't shine the light on it. Some part of me knew that if I did, I'd see something I couldn't forget. The final straw came when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Soft, measured, one after another, up the metal spiral that leads to the hatch. I froze. The radio clicked on again, not to static, but to a whisper. "Let us in." I shut off the radio, grabbed the axe from under the cot, waited beside the hatch for hours, but it never opened. When I looked outside again, the trees were closer, pressed against the tower's legs, watching. I've started writing things down in a new journal, not to keep track of them anymore. That's pointless. They grow when I remember. They get closer when I count. But if I stop writing, I think I'll disappear. Not die. Just stop being. Melt into the wood. Become one of the watchers. That's what they want. They don't devour. They collect. They turn you into silence. There are moments, just before dawn, when the forest turns blue. Not the blue of sky or water, but something deeper, like the color of a bruise hidden beneath the skin of the world. It's during these moments I feel the most lucid and the most watched. On the 33rd morning, I realized the sun hadn't risen. The sky lightened. Yes, the mist shifted. But the sun itself, the shape, the warmth, never came over the ridge. There was only a vague brightness, diffuse, flat, like the world had forgotten how to move forward. That same day, I noticed the windows weren't fogging anymore. Instead, they were weeping. Thin lines of moisture ran down the glass from the top, but they came from the inside. I pressed my palm to the pane. It was cool and wet, like skin that had been crying in silence. In the lines of condensation, I saw new symbols, spirals, eyes, a tree drawn upside down, its roots reaching for the sky. I wiped them away. They reappeared an hour later. I stopped using the radio. Even turning the dial made my chest feel tight, like I was tuning into something not meant for me. Once, just before dusk, I heard a voice, not breathing this time, laughter. But it wasn't a human sound. It was too hollow, too slow, like someone mimicking laughter without knowing what it meant. It spoke one word, closer. I unplugged the battery and tossed it down the stairs. It never hit the ground. From then on, things changed quickly. The walls of the tower began pulsing, only slightly, but enough that I noticed it when I sat still for long stretches. A slow in and out flexing, like lungs breathing through the wood grain. At night, I heard movement beneath the floorboards. Not animals, not wind, dragging, like something pulling itself around the base of the tower. Sometimes it scratched, not frantically, rhythmically, like it was carving something in. I tried sleeping during the day, hoping to reset whatever rhythm had broken inside me. But my dreams followed, and they were sharper now. The trees in the dreams no longer looked like trees. They had too many limbs, too many joints. They bent where no living thing should bend, and they watched me. Every dream, I stood at the edge of a vast clearing, and they circled around me. One step forward, its bark split open, and inside was me. Not alive, not breathing, just hung in there, suspended, eyes open, smiling. On day 38, I looked out and saw another tower, identical to mine, across the western ridge. It hadn't been there before. I know the forest. I know every rise and fall, every bend of tree line. There had never been another structure, but now there was. I raised my binoculars. In the window, a figure stood, staring back. They raised their binoculars. We locked eyes, and I understood. It was me. From that point forward, the nights lengthened. The shadows grew thicker. My flashlight dimmed, no matter how fresh the batteries. The oil lamp burned lower than it should. Once, in the middle of the night, I noticed the moonlight had shifted. There were no clouds, no rain, but the light coming through the glass was red, and it flickered like candlelight. I began hearing whispers beneath my own thoughts. Not words exactly, more like memories that weren't mine. Impressions of things I'd never done. A deep voice calling from beneath the roots. The sensation of digging with bare hands. The taste of moss on my tongue. They came to me while I was awake. The journal I kept began filling itself. Blank pages scrawled with notes in my own handwriting. If they learn your name, they keep it. Don't let them remember you. You were never sent here. You grew here. I opened the trap door to the stairs one night, intending to look, just look at what waited below, and I saw something climbing. Slowly, silently. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It had the shape of both. Long limbs, bark for skin, no eyes, but it knew me. I felt it in my chest, a thrum, like a name being spoken from inside my own ribs. I shut the hatch. It knocked once, and then left. The books I brought up were all gone now, replaced by blank journals. Hundreds of them, spines facing inward, pages empty until I touched them. Then the writing bloomed like ink bleeding through skin. You are becoming, and the trees, they reached the top of the tower. I don't know when it happened, but I stepped outside one morning and saw branches level with the windows. Thick, dark branches. Still, watching. One of them tapped the glass, slow and steady. I didn't move. The tap continued, then stopped, and something whispered, not with a voice, but with presence. We remember you. On day 43, I opened the hatch again. The forest floor was gone. In its place, roots, tangled, endless, moving slowly like the floor of an ocean. And beneath them, faces. Dozens of them, maybe more. Not dead, not alive, just waiting. Some had their eyes open. Others had bark covering their mouths. I saw my brother among them. He didn't blink. I realized then, this wasn't about watching for fire. This tower was not a job. It was a cage. Not for me, but for what sleeps beneath. And I, like the watchers before me, was the last part of the ritual. A sentinel, an offering, a seed. On the 45th morning, I stopped recognizing the tower. The dimensions were wrong. The walls, once 12 paces wide, now took 20 steps to cross. The windows had no seams. The corners curved slightly inward, like I was inside, something that had grown, not something that had been built. And the air was different, heavier, breathing. When I placed my palm against the floor, I could feel a heartbeat, not mine. That day, the tower began to creak, not from wind, There was none. The sound came from within the wood itself, groaning like an old boat on black water. The beams flexed slightly with each pulse, and the metal bolts began to bleed a thin black sap. I wrapped my hands in cloth to avoid touching it, but it didn't help. The cloth soaked through in seconds and started to smoke. It was then I noticed my reflection was no longer mine. Not in the window in the oil lamp glass, in the sheen of a cooking pot, in the mirror I'd avoided since day 15. The thing looking back at me smiled too slowly. Its eyes didn't blink in sync. Its movements were rehearsed, like it had studied me and forgotten a few steps. One night, I moved left. It moved right. I turned all the reflective surfaces toward the walls. It didn't matter. The face began appearing in the wood grain. The knots in the pine walls twisted into eyes. The floorboards curled like lips. And when I laid on the cot, I felt hands underneath me, not touching, but holding, waiting. It was then I remembered something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I had never met my predecessor. The person I replaced, no handoff, no note, no trace. The tower was stocked when I arrived. Neat, ready, almost welcoming. I had been told the last ranger left early, personal reasons. But now, I realized they didn't leave. They were still here. The rain didn't come from the sky anymore. It began falling from the walls. At night, a slow, steady patter soaked the inside of the tower. It wasn't water. It was warm, viscous, clear, but with faint black threads floating inside like veins. I stopped drinking from my bottles. I stopped sleeping. I paced in slow circles, counting the ridges in the walls, listening to the whispers that now filled every silence. And they always said the same thing. You've grown well. One night, I opened the trap door again, and this time, there were stairs beneath it. New ones, thick wood, fresh grain, leading down, farther than the tower had ever extended. I don't remember walking, but I found myself descending, step after step, into something that wasn't forest anymore. The walls weren't made of trees. They were made of ribs, huge, arched bones, coated in moss and fungus, pulsing slightly with breath. The staircase spiraled downward for what felt like hours. At the bottom was a door, and etched into it, we remember our roots. I opened the door. There was no handle, only a single notch, the width of a palm. I pressed my hand into it. It fit. The door dissolved into mist. Beyond was the root chamber, a great hollow beneath the forest, where the roots of all the trees met, tangled, coiled, living. The ceiling was lost in blackness. The walls were soft and pulsing. The roots formed a great mass at the center, like a sleeping heart made of bark and memory. I felt it before I saw it. The being, not a god, not a creature, a presence. It didn't speak in words. It didn't move. But I knew it had grown me. Not just me, all of us. The rangers, the watchers, the forest caretakers. We weren't hired. We were bloomed, planted, cultivated, grown like branches in a network of memory and purpose, to watch, to keep it dreaming. The revelation struck me not with terror, but with recognition. This was always the end. The others before me, they were here still. In the roots. Their memories fed the system. Their bodies nourished the structure. Their shapes were reused, regrown. I saw them dozens of versions of myself, all standing in the dark, all smiling, all watching me. And in the center, the first, a towering figure of wood and shadow, faceless, covered in bark that shifted like pages of an old book. Its limbs hung like twisted branches. From its chest, a single root connected to the rest, the dream nerve. I understood then. I had been its dream, my grief, my silence, my need to disappear. It had given me all of that. It had become the silence. And now it was time to return. It opened its arms, not like a threat, like a cradle. And I stepped forward, not because I was forced, but because I understood. I had always been part of it. A seed scattered through memory, a root growing upward into thought, a leaf that had forgotten its tree. Until now, as I stepped into the embrace, I felt my skin change. Not burn, not tear, just soften, stretch, bark in place of breath, silence in place of blood. And I became part of it. Not gone, just remembered. You might be wondering, who's telling this now? That's the strange thing. Memory doesn't end when you become part of something older. It stretches, echoes the way a voice might carry across a canyon. I'm not who I was, but I still remember being him. I remember the fire watch tower, the soft hush of pine needles underfoot, the way the fog would roll across the valley like breath from some sleeping thing. Back then, I thought I was escaping something. Now I know. I was being called home. The forest is quiet now, not because it's still, but because it listens. The wind that threads through its branches no longer speaks in gusts. It hums, low and constant, like a lullaby. The birds do not sing. The animals do not cry. Everything here is in place, as it was meant to be. And beneath the roots, we all wait. Some of us newly grown, others ancient and folded into the base of things, indistinguishable from the dirt. We do not speak to each other. There is no need. We share the same dream. Above us, the tower still stands. You can't see it unless it wants to be seen. Sometimes a hiker strays too far from the trails. They see the glint of glass high in the trees, or hear a voice, not words, just a rhythm, something that makes them pause and squint toward the ridge. Most turn back. A few don't. We don't stop them. The ones who come closer are often those like I was, quiet souls, already heavy with forgetting. They think they want peace. They think they're chasing solitude. But solitude is never empty. Sometimes it watches. Once every season, someone new arrives. They never remember the hike. They always wake up on the cot, supplies neatly packed, journal half filled already. The forest shifts itself to welcome them, and the tower breathes again. They'll think it's temporary. They'll say it's a break, a way to reset. But eventually, they'll feel it too. The trees don't stay still. The light doesn't fall right. The reflections move when they shouldn't. And the forest will begin whispering, "We remember you. I don't regret it. That might be the strangest part. The deeper I sink, the more I feel. Not as a person, not even as a thought, but as a rhythm, a slow, pulsing tide, the kind that roots follow underground. I know now that this place doesn't devour, it incorporates. We are not lost. We are grown, replanted. Our memories become part of the canopy, our sorrow drawn up through the sap like sugar. Even grief becomes mulch here. Even silence flowers. If you're hearing this, you're already close. Maybe you're sitting in a cabin nearby, the rain soft on your roof, thinking about the quiet. Maybe you found an old radio, and something told you to listen just a little longer. Maybe you've seen the tower, or maybe it's already seen you. Don't be afraid. Not yet. The forest doesn't chase. It waits, and it remembers well. But if you feel the trees leaning, if the trail you walked yesterday is gone today, if you find fresh pine needles on your windowsill, even though you're 3 floors up, then maybe you're being offered something. Not escape, but release. Because in the end, we all return to the roots. And when the tower calls, there's only one question that matters. Do you want to be forgotten? Or do you want to belong? I hadn't planned to return to Gloom Ridge. Even the name sounded like something made up, some cartoonish fog-drenched village tucked away on the edge of memory. But the map assured me it was real. A dot surrounded by state forest and empty highway. A place with no major roads leading in or out. 1 blinking traffic light. 2 diners. And 1 old house sitting on the hill above the lake, waiting. I inherited it 6 weeks ago. My mother's sister, Clara, passed away in October. We weren't close, barely spoke really. But she'd never married, never had kids, and for reasons still unclear, she left the property to me in her will. The letter from the executor was brief. A key was included. The note simply said, "Keep it safe. Don't move anything, and don't sleep in her room." I told myself I wouldn't stay long. Just a few days to sort the paperwork, clear out anything valuable, and lock the place up until it could be sold. I thought about hiring a cleanup crew, but something pulled me in. Not sentiment, more like a quiet thread of responsibility. A need to see it with my own eyes. Besides, I had nowhere else to be. The city had worn me down. My job copywriting for a firm that changed names every fiscal quarter had collapsed in a slow-motion merger. The breakup came 2 weeks later, over coffee that went cold before either of us said much. Then came the days of silence, followed by 1 long night of aimless walking in the rain until dawn burned through a narrow sky. That was when the envelope arrived. White, unmarked, slipped under my apartment door with no postage, just my name. It was time. I arrived on a gray afternoon. The clouds had settled so low they felt like ceilings. The trees leaned toward the road as I passed, draped in wet leaves, and the houses grew fewer until there were none. Then came the lake. Still, silent, pale green like melted glass. The house waited beyond it, perched on the far hill, stone chimney rising like a marker. I remembered it vaguely from one childhood summer, the year my parents sent me to stay with Aunt Clara after their divorce. I remembered the red door, the smell of old paper and lavender, the way her cat always stared at corners like it saw something I couldn't. The house was almost exactly as I remembered. 3 stories of gray stone and dark wood, with a steep shingled roof and narrow windows like watching eyes. Vines clung to the walls. The porch creaked beneath my weight. The air smelled of rain and old cedar. When I turned the key, the door opened easily, as if it had just been closed moments ago. Inside, the house was cold. Not freezing, just unwelcoming. Like something that had paused mid-breath when I walked in. Dust coated everything, though not as much as you'd expect from a place left alone. The furniture was covered in sheets, but they weren't yellowed. A single teacup sat on the kitchen counter, half full. There was no dust on it. I walked the halls slowly. The house was filled with odd angles and narrow doors. High ceilings, but small rooms. Old wallpaper peeled in subtle curls, revealing older layers beneath floral over stripes. Stripes over a muddy gray I didn't recognize. The windows didn't face where I thought they should, but I told myself it was just age. I chose a room on the 2nd floor to sleep in, not hers. Hers was at the end of the hall, door shut. I didn't open it. The bed in my room was surprisingly firm. The linen smelled faintly of rosewater. I unpacked a single bag, opened a window to let in the breeze, and sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time, listening. The house creaked and ticked, but not aimlessly. It sounded like movement, like weight shifting somewhere deep within the walls. That night, it rained, a steady curtain of sound that blurred the edges of thought. I lay awake, listening to the roof drip, to the distant groan of old pipes, and the occasional shuffle from the hallway outside my room. Once, I thought I heard the faint click of her bedroom door opening, but when I checked, it was still shut. In the morning, I found a photograph on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there the night before. It was old black and white, edges curling, and showed the house as it looked maybe 50 years ago. In the photo, someone stood at the upstairs window. Their face was too blurred to see, but I could tell this. It wasn't Aunt Clara, and they were standing in her room. The second morning, I found the bedroom door open. Not mine, hers. The end of the hallway looked longer than I remembered, darker too. The air there had a weight to it, like something pressing gently against your chest. I stood at the threshold for several minutes, just staring at the gap between the frame and the door. I hadn't opened it, and I had locked it. The brass key had taken effort to turn the night before an old lock with a stubborn click. I remembered doing it, clearly. The resistance, the slight twist of the wrist, the way the air in the hallway felt colder the moment I turned the key. But now it was ajar, just slightly, enough to see that the bed inside had been made. Perfectly. Too perfectly. I didn't go in. Instead, I backed away and went downstairs. Made coffee. Sat in the kitchen with the rain pressing against the glass. I told myself it was just old wood and a loose lock, that the house had settled, that my memory was playing tricks. But when I returned with my coffee mug to look again, the door was closed. I hadn't heard it move, and the key was back in the lock, turned. That evening, I opened the fridge. It was empty, as expected except for one thing. A jar of strawberry preserves. Homemade. The label on it simply read, July. I hadn't noticed it the day before. and yet the dust on the fridge shelves was undisturbed, except where the jar sat as if it had been placed there recently or carefully kept for someone specific. That night, I slept with the door to my bedroom locked and a chair wedged beneath the handle. I started noticing small things. Each morning, something had shifted slightly. A rug unrolled at a different angle. A window I had closed, now cracked open just enough to let in a breeze. Once, I found my toothbrush wet, and I hadn't used it yet. On the fourth night, I woke around 3:00 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. Not loud, not alarming, just repetitive. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound was coming from the hallway, specifically from behind her bedroom door. It continued for maybe a minute, then silence. I stayed awake the rest of the night. In the morning, I found a small white pebble placed at the foot of my bed. I didn't touch it. The house began to feel different during the day. Not brighter, lighter, like it was pretending to be friendly. Sunlight filtered in through windows I hadn't cleaned. The smell of old wood seemed more nostalgic than musty. The wind in the pines outside the kitchen window swayed gently, like background music to a memory. But I couldn't shake the sense of attention, as if the house was aware I was watching it, and it was trying to keep me calm, or worse, keep me here. On the fifth day, I opened a drawer in the study and found my handwriting, except I hadn't written anything. It was a single page of notepaper, lined in blue, placed neatly on the desk. The pen strokes were mine, loops, slants, that small hesitation I always made on my lowercase r. The note read, "Don't forget to check the attic." But I hadn't been in the attic. I didn't know where the access was. And yet the handwriting was undeniably mine. I crumpled it up and threw it in the fireplace. Didn't light it. Just watched it sit there, quietly threatening the idea of logic. I avoided mirrors. It wasn't something I did consciously. It just started happening. The full-length one in the upstairs hall became something I walked past without glancing. The oval one in the bathroom steamed up faster than it should. When I did catch a glimpse of myself, it felt wrong, not unfamiliar, just off by a beat. Like the reflection was waiting for me to look away so it could move on its own. On the sixth night, I heard music, very faint, like a gramophone left running in a distant room. A scratchy waltz, just at the edge of hearing. It came from upstairs. From her room, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to it fade in and out, and then a voice, not clear, not speaking words, just humming, a soft, tuneless hum that I recognized but couldn't place. A sound I knew from childhood, something comforting once, now hollowed out by time. The moment I reached for the doorknob, it stopped. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, barefoot, shivering, listening to a silence that felt thick and waiting. By the seventh morning, I'd had enough. I packed my bag, called a car, but no signal. Not just bad service, nothing. My phone didn't even register the attempt to connect. The bar stayed red. The battery drained faster than it should have. I walked into town. It took an hour. The diner at the edge of the lake was open. 2 men sat at the counter, 1 waitress. No one said anything when I came in. I asked if there was Wi-Fi. She shook her head slowly, said something about weather interference and the hills blocking reception. I asked if anyone had a landline I could use. The older man said, without looking at me, "It never works that way after someone moves in." And then he smiled but not at me. At the window, where the lake rippled even though there was no wind. When I got back to the house, the key was gone from my pocket. The door was unlocked anyway. Inside, the light had changed. Everything looked a little too clean, like someone had spent the day scrubbing. The teacup on the counter was gone. In its place was a second photograph. This one showed the same window as before her bedroom, and this time the face was visible. It was mine. The third photograph was waiting in the hallway the next morning, taped to the mirror. It showed me sitting in the study, pen in hand, head tilted exactly the way I looked when journaling, except I hadn't used the study in 3 days, and I had never worn that sweater. I stared at the photo for a long time. It was printed on glossy paper, recent, crisp, not faded like the first 2. Someone had taken it, developed it, placed it here, in a house with no camera, no printer, no electricity, beyond the basics. The house was watching, not just observing, replicating. I started hearing footsteps that matched mine, not just in pace, in timing. I'd turn down the hallway and hear my own steps repeat a half beat behind me, like an echo, but too precise, too real, as if someone were following me at a fixed distance, stepping into the exact same places I had just walked. Once, I stopped short, and the echo kept going. 2 more steps, then nothing. Like it hadn't noticed I'd paused, like it was trying to catch up. The attic door revealed itself on the 10th day, a narrow seam above the linen closet in the hall. I hadn't seen it before, not once, but now it was obvious. A pull cord dangled gently, as if in a breeze I couldn't feel. It didn't feel like discovery. It felt like invitation. I told myself I wouldn't pull it. I went downstairs. When I returned 20 minutes later, the ladder was already down. I didn't go up. Not then. But that night, I dreamed of the attic, of a space that had no ceiling, just beams stretching upward into fog, and of a woman standing among them. Not Aunt Clara, not quite me, but close enough to be confusing. She moved slowly, like someone remembering how to use their limbs. Her head turned in small, twitchy motions, like she was studying how her shadow fell across the floorboards. She never looked at me, but she was listening. And when I woke, I was standing at the bottom of the attic stairs, barefoot, holding the first photograph. I started noticing things missing. Nothing big. Not at first. My favorite pen, a pair of socks, a spoon with a small chip in the handle, a paperback novel I'd brought with me all gone. In their place, objects that resembled them. Close, but wrong. The pen was too smooth. The socks slightly smaller. The novel had the same title, but the author's name was unfamiliar. Inside, the pages were blank, as if something was trying to replace what I knew one item at a time. The mirror in the bathroom no longer fogged, no matter how hot the water ran. But more than that, the reflection was always a fraction behind. I would brush my hair, and the movement in the glass would start a second too late. I'd tilt my head, and the image would follow only after I'd stopped. And sometimes, it would smile when I didn't. A soft, slow curl of the lips. I opened the attic on the 12th night. I don't know what changed. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe some part of me already understood that if I didn't confront it, it would simply replace me before I noticed. The attic was cold, dry, dusty. A single bulb hung from a frayed cord, its light a weak amber. The floorboards creaked with each step. In the far corner, a mirror, full length, ornate, covered in a white sheet. I approached slowly, heart racing, pulled the sheet away, and saw myself standing still, pale, watching, not mimicking, not blinking, just watching. There was something wrong with the face, subtle but wrong. The eyes were too dark, the mouth too straight, the posture too calm. I reached out. It didn't. I turned to leave, and it moved, not toward me, but behind the glass, as if the mirror were a window, as if something had just backed away from it. The next morning, I found another note in the study, same handwriting as before mine. She's almost ready. You should rest. It was dated 3 days ahead. I stopped sleeping. The reflections grew bolder. They would appear in windows I wasn't near, mirrors that weren't angled toward me. Once, in the spoon I was holding, I saw myself blink, except I hadn't. On the 15th night, I turned the corner at the top of the stairs and saw the attic door already open. Something stood at the top of the ladder, a silhouette, my height, my shape, head tilted in that same curious twitch from the dream. It didn't move, not even when I whispered, "Who are you?" But when I stepped back, it stepped down, exactly in rhythm with my retreat. I don't remember opening the attic door again, but one morning, I woke up to the smell of rose water. It clung to the pillow, hung in the air, like a song you half remember from childhood. And when I sat up, the mirror at the foot of the bed was covered in condensation. Though the room was cold, the windows shut. A single word had been written into the fogged glass. Soon, I stopped keeping time. Clocks in the house began to slow, then speed up, then freeze altogether. The one on the mantel spun for hours, the second hand dragging behind, like it was caught in syrup. Outside, the rain never stopped. Gray sky, still pines, the lake like a lid over something sleeping. That night, I heard the study door open on its own. A slow creak, floorboards shifting, the sound of something sitting down in the chair. I crept to the hallway, peered around the corner, and saw myself, back turned, head bent over the desk, pen in hand, scribbling onto paper. Except it wasn't writing. It was copying, over and over, the same sentence. I am here. You are not. I stepped backward. The figure stilled. Then its head twitched, just slightly in my direction. And without turning around, it whispered in my voice, I like this house. I fled upstairs, locked the door, pushed the dresser against it, sat in the corner, shaking. There was no denial left, no rationalizing. Whatever this thing was, it had learned me. Not just my face, not just my movements, my voice, my thoughts. It wasn't haunting me. It wasn't attacking me. It was replacing me, piece by piece, like a house slowly redone. A new floorboard here, a new curtain there, until one day you wake up and none of it is yours anymore, but it still feels like home. In the early hours, I heard her walking, soft steps, deliberate, from the attic, down the hall, to my door. Then nothing. Not a knock, not a breath. Just her presence waiting. She didn't want to get in. She was waiting for me to come out. On the 19th night, I finally entered Aunt Clara's room. I had avoided it for weeks. Out of fear, out of respect, out of the last thread of normalcy I still clung to. But the door was open now. The bed made, the curtains drawn, the mirror uncovered, and sitting at the vanity was Clara. At least, that's what my eyes told me. But her body was still, too still. No breath, no blink. And her hands resting on the desk were made of paper. Dozens of pages folded, layered, bent into the shape of knuckles, wrists, arms, each one covered in my handwriting. The same sentence repeated again and again. I am her. She is me. I am home. I stepped closer. The figure collapsed into itself, scattering like ash across the floor. And in the mirror I saw myself, but not in real time. I watched myself enter the room, look around, step forward. I was watching the moment I had just lived, only it hadn't happened yet. The reflection was ahead of me, and it smiled. That was when I understood. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was a mimicry engine. It learned those who entered, listened, observed, replicated. Then it moved forward, replacing you where you lived, in your routines, in your speech, in your thoughts. And once it had enough, once it could mirror you without needing you, it erased you from your own life, not through violence, but through inheritance, like a letter you never sent, arriving in your own handwriting. I ran to the front door. It opened easily. The storm had stopped. The pines were still. The lake, silent. I stood on the porch, bag in hand, heart thundering. But then I saw her, standing by the water, facing the house, wearing my coat, my expression, arms folded the way I always folded them when cold. She looked back, not surprised, not aggressive, just settled, and nodded, as if giving me permission to leave, or telling me, "You already did. I should have run." Down the hill, across the lake road, into the tree line until my legs gave out. I should have left without looking back, but I didn't. I stepped off the porch and looked at her, the woman by the water, the one who looked like me, wore my face like it fit better than it ever had on me, still, serene. She didn't move, didn't beckon. She didn't need to, because the house was no longer inside. It was here, too, in the air, in the trees, in the calm that settled over the lake like a memory you can't quite trust. I stood there in the soft gray light for a long time, and then I whispered to her, to it, to the house. What happens now? No answer. Only a breeze through the pine needles that almost formed words. And then the faint sound of a door clicking shut behind me. When I turned around, the house looked different. Not in a dramatic way. No new wings, no windows where there hadn't been, but rearranged, like it had tilted slightly while I wasn't looking. The porch steps creaked underfoot in a rhythm I didn't recognize. Inside, the furniture had moved. The study desk now faced the wrong wall. The kitchen chairs were subtly different, backs higher, legs more curved. The wallpaper had changed shades, slightly warmer, as if it were adjusting for someone new. I walked through the house like a stranger, each room unfamiliar in small ways. Softer corners, rounder knobs, a hallway slightly longer than memory allowed. My bedroom still held my bag, half packed, but the clothes inside didn't fit. The sleeves were too short, the fabric thinner than I remembered. The scent was lavender, not my detergent. I opened my notebook, the one I'd been journaling in since day 2, and found the pages filled, not in my handwriting, but close, too close. A mimicry so precise it made my stomach turn. And each entry ended the same way. I love it here.